Chapter 108. Chang'an was a city that had no regrets, except for its summer. In June, the sun was getting brighter and brighter, and the temperature was getting higher and higher. The hot summer air enveloped the streets and alleys. Occasionally, the wind would blow with a disgusting warm breath, wilting the originally green and plump leaves, staining the grapes on the racks purple, bringing out the ice cubes from the houses of the nobles, and pushing open the doors and windows of the commoners. All the doors and windows of the shops along the street of Lin 47th Street were open. Compared to the risk of theft, the risk of dying from heat stroke was obviously more terrifying. The poor manservants and waiters sat on the stone steps and looked around weakly, guarding against the thieves who had also stayed at home to enjoy the cool air. The shopkeepers and the masters moved bamboo chairs and water buckets to an alley behind the street. The alleys were quiet and narrow, shaded by green pagoda trees. There was not much sunlight during the day, and the night wind was much faster because of the narrow alleys, which made people feel relatively cool when it blew on them. All kinds of bamboo beds and small square tables had completely blocked the narrow alleys behind the street. The neighbors were lying on the bamboo beds and chatting lazily, with fruits soaked in well water on the small square tables beside them. There were also those who were used to finding joy in bitterness. They dug into their bowls of oily noodles, the sweat from the chili mixed with the sweat from the stuffy heat. They used the trick of fighting poison with poison to deceive themselves that the night was not that unbearably hot. From time to time, there would be a clear smack in the alleys. It sounded like an adult was educating a naughty child, but in fact, it was just people patting their greasy and sweaty backs with towels soaked in well water. You can't. Do you still want to find someone to warm your feet on such a hot day? The couple in the fake antique shop argued day after day about taking a concubine. The people on Lin 47th Street had long been tired of hearing it, and even began to wonder if it was a kind of flirtation. There was also a back door at the back street of the old brush pen shop. It had not been used for a few days, but now it was finally put to use. Ning Ke lay on the bamboo chair and took the wet towel from Sang Sang. He sighed and wiped his naked upper body. Listening to the quarrel coming from the bamboo bed next door, he thought that the life of the common people was not as interesting as what scholars said. Since it was boring, he decided to leave. He put the wet towel on his shoulder, got up and said goodbye to his neighbors before returning to his own courtyard. Sang Sang followed him with a bucket in one hand and a bamboo recliner in the other. Today, the little handmaiden was wearing a thin blue floral blouse. Her arms and legs were bare, and her tanned face was flushed. Her body was too cold to sweat, but it did not mean that she could not feel the heat inside and outside the eaves. On the contrary, it made her feel more annoyed. She looked at Ning Ke by the well and asked, "Young master, can I take off my outer blouse?" Ning Ke fetched a bucket of fresh cold water from the well and was about to pour it on his head to get rid of the annoying heat. Suddenly, he heard her words and could not help but feel more annoyed. He turned his back and lectured her, "Although you are young, you are still a girl. How can you take off your clothes in front of a man? You are not 3 or 4 years old anymore. I can wipe your body and take a bath for you. You are about to become a big girl. Wake up, will you?" Sang Sang stared at him angrily and asked, "Young master, you didn't answer me just now. Is revenge really so interesting? Killing one every few days? Don't you find it boring?" "This is an interesting and irrelevant thing," Ning Ke replied. "We are eating leftovers every day. We have to go to the toilet every day. Isn't it boring and repetitive? But you still have to do it. Because if you don't eat, you will starve to death. If you don't poop, you will suffocate to death. Killing for revenge is boring, but in order to live in peace, no matter how boring it is, you still have to kill." After saying this, he raised his hands and flipped them over. The entire bucket of slightly cold well water splashed onto his body, and then poured onto the stone floor of the small courtyard. His spirit was immediately refreshed, and then he found that his lower body was slightly cold. He looked down in surprise, and saw that the cotton shorts he was wearing had actually been washed down by a section. Sang Sang looked at his exposed buttocks and the tight trousers around his buttocks. She giggled, which was rare for her. She covered her mouth with her small hands, but she couldn't hide her joy. Ning Ke lifted the shorts and turned back to scold her angrily. What are you looking at? Killing is more interesting than this. Sang Sang put down her little hand and looked at him seriously. She replied, I will make a bowl of fat intestine noodles later. In summer, it was the darkest and coolest time in Chang'an City before dawn. The residents who were forced to lie on the street by the hot night returned to their beds. They took advantage of this short period of coolness to have the most wonderful and deep sleep, trying to make up for all the time lost in the summer. No one slept in the old brush pen shop. Sang Sang made a bowl of fragrant noodle soup with a lot of chives, 6 or 7 pieces of fat intestine and 2 pieces of large intestine. Ning Ke ate the noodle soup like a whirlwind. He wiped his mouth and put on a shabby ordinary outer shirt and a brand new ordinary bamboo hat. He covered most of his face with a mask and wrapped the padao and the big black umbrella with a coarse cloth. Then, he pushed open the back door of the small courtyard and walked into the night after saying goodbye to the little handmaiden. Walking through the quiet streets and alleys of the eastern city, the cool night wind passed through them. Whether it was the tired residents or the vigilant dogs, they were all sleeping sweetly. It seemed that the whole city had not woken up yet. Only the sound of the water delivery cart rolling over the bluestone could be heard from time to time, and then it gradually faded away. The faint light of the lantern illuminated the road ahead of the water delivery cart, which was swaying restlessly. When the water delivery cart passed by the side entrance of a marketplace in the southern city, Ning Ke, who had been silently squatting in the gap of the big bucket, jumped down. His feet landed on the ground silently and his body quickly flashed into the darkness of the side alley of the marketplace. Then, he took out the hand-drawn map by Sang Sang and looked at it for the last time in the extremely dim light. Just as Sang Sang was puzzled, planning to kill a person every once in a while was totally incompatible with the quiet and bitter life of studying in the academy and the noisy and annoying life in the marketplace on Lin 47th Street. Moreover, this kind of boring repetition was really boring. But for Ning Ke, who had just returned to Chang'an from the city of Wei, eating a bowl of noodles with fat intestines or noodles with fried eggs from time to time and then killing people for revenge was like writing a few pieces of calligraphy and meditating for a few hours. It had become a very important part of his life and even a kind of habit. Every time he killed a target for revenge, every time he erased a name on the oil paper list, he would feel that the burden on his shoulders was reduced, his body was relaxed, and the sticky blood on his hands was a little lighter. Everyone instinctively yearned for a relaxed and happy life, so his instinct urged him to continue doing it. Sang Sang had prepared the knife, the cloth mask, the coat, the bamboo hat, the map and the target's living habits and schedule. A little black-faced handmaiden walking through the streets of Chang'an would not attract anyone's attention. Ning Ke was not worried about her safety, but trusted her ability. Therefore, every time he was about to unsheath his knife, he never thought that he would not be able to cut off a head, including today. When he quietly entered the marketplace under the cover of the night and walked toward the small lake behind the tea house, he had already begun to use that person's head as a sacrifice to the general's mansion and many people in the village. Today, he was going to erase the third name on the oil paper list. The owner of that head was Yen Suqing, 41 years old, a former document appraiser of the military ministry. He was good at tea ceremony and seal appraisal. After being driven out of the military ministry by the imperial court with an excuse, he became a tea master specially hired by a famous tea merchant in Chang'an. According to Zhuo'er's investigation, the irrefutable evidence that Xianwei general was accused of treason and colluding with the enemy was personally appraised by this person, and it was even possible that the 3 letters were forged by this person. This person also had a lot of unclear connections with the massacre of the village in the Yen territory. When Xiao's army pointed at the Yen kingdom, but failed to arrive at the edge of Min Mountain, Yan Suqing was in Xiaoho's army. But it was puzzling why, as a document appraiser of the military ministry, he would appear on the frontline battlefield full of killing and blood. Yan Suqing was now living in a lakeside house purchased for him by a tea merchant. Ning Ke walked along the lakeside quietly. Looking at the row of secluded houses on the lakeside getting closer and closer, as well as the bamboo walls and thatched cottages that seemed to be alienated but with a hint of antiquity, Ning Ke slowly raised his eyebrows outside the mask and suddenly felt something wrong. Because this lakeside house was too quiet and secluded. It was not easy to live in Chang'an. It could be said that every inch of land was worth its weight in gold. In the bustling city, the word, quiet and secluded, represented nobility, and it was very expensive. Ning Ke knew that Yan Suqing was deeply trusted and relied on by the tea merchant, but he believed that no matter how extravagant and generous a tycoon was, it was impossible for him to give such a lakeside house to his subordinate tea master. The morning light still hadn't arrived, and the view of the lakeside was still dark. Only the ripples of the water reflected the lights of some unknown houses, giving a faint light. Ning Ke walked to the front of the lakeside house, looking at the huge stone chair under the stone steps in the courtyard and the emaciated middle-aged man sitting in the chair through the alienated bamboo wall. After a slight pause, he pushed the door and entered. A small oil lamp was lit, and the emaciated middle-aged man sat on the stone chair, holding a coarse big mud-made teacup in his left hand, and gently knocking the corner of the ebony tea table with his right hand. He calmly looked at the lad who pushed the door and entered, and a faint smile suddenly appeared on his thin cheeks, and then he said softly, "The so-called tea ceremony is actually to strengthen a certain sense of ceremony with a complicated process, so as to produce a sense of solemnity. Many people think that when I drink tea at home, I must burn incense, take a bath, worship Haotian for a long time, and then wash the cup in the sea and play with it silently for a while before I can send the tea to my mouth. In fact, what I like most in my life is holding a big teacup and drinking tea. Maybe it's a habit developed in the army, and I prefer to be straightforward. On such a hot summer night, lad, you are restlessly sleeping in the house, but strolling by the lake. Presumably, you are here to kill me. Abstain from anger and anger. If you can't, close yourself and write quietly. Today I write very slowly and painstakingly, but this chapter is published after revision. There are still 2 more chapters, and I will continue to write slowly and seriously. Finally, I say, well, I won't say it, see you later. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for recommendation or monthly vote. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 109. The lakeside house under the shade of the bamboo wall was quiet and dark. The middle-aged tea artist was sitting on a stone chair carved with Kuan Lake stone, and in front of him was a tea table carved with Kuan Lake stone, on which there was an ebony tea table, on which there were warm and clean teapots and teacups. Beside the table was a small portable charcoal stove, on which the kettle on the stove exuded faint steam, but it had not boiled yet. In such a hot summer night, the middle-aged tea artist seemed not to feel the heat brought by the small charcoal stove. He was draped in a thin coat, and was as calm as a hospitable host waiting for someone to return in a winter snowy night. He was Yan Suqing. Ning Ke was very sure of this. The vigilance he had before outside the lakeside house was finally confirmed at this moment, because the other party had sensed his coming in advance, and had already perceived his intention. Glancing at the tea dregs under the bamboo wall with the corner of his eyes, and after a moment of silence, he looked at the tea artist in the chair and asked, "Then let's be direct. I want to know whether you have anything to do with the extermination of the whole family of the Xianwei general's mansion and the massacre of the Yan border village." Yan Suqing slightly frowned. He did not expect that the lad who came to kill him tonight was actually because of the 2 things many years ago. He had thought that no one in the world remembered those old things. After a moment of silence, he smiled and said, "Of course it has something to do with me. Otherwise, how could I, an officer with a bright future in the military ministry, become a tea artist who looks after the house of a tea merchant. I should not be the first person you've come to. He looked at Ning Kei and asked, how are the others now? I haven't seen them for many years. I don't know what they are doing now. Ning Kei silently observed the lakeside house and the movements around. Looking at this noble residence, he answered, they are not living well, at least not as good as you, who can live in such a nice place. Yen Suqing laughed out, shook his head and said with emotion, do you know why they are all not doing well, but I can live well? Because I am still of some use to the empire. The messy clothes on the body, the unboiled water on the small charcoal stove, and the empty teacup in his left hand all indicated that the tea specialist had just woken up. He probably got up because he sensed that Ning Kei was near the lakeside house. He was not planning to ambush Ning Kei in advance. He was just a tea artisan who looked weak and frail and dealt with tea sets and spring water all day long. Why didn't he call for help or run away when he knew that someone was coming to kill him? Instead, he just sat there calmly and waited. What could he rely on? Moreover, what use could a tea master have for the empire? How could a tea master guard a tea merchant's house? How could a tea master have a better retirement life than Chen Zixin? In the blink of an eye, Ning Kei thought of many possibilities, even the most impossible one. An unprecedented solemn expression appeared on his childish face outside the mask. He looked at the other party and asked, why didn't you escape? Why should I run? Yen Suqing looked at the teenager with a smile and said, since I'm awake, how could you kill me? After saying this, he gently flicked his sleeves, and a small dark sword without a handle appeared on the stone table. Ning Kei frowned and his body became a little stiff. He knew that he had encountered the most impossible possibility. This weak and frail tea artisan was actually a cultivator. At this moment, he could not help thinking of the conversation he had with Liu Qingchen on the journey. The conversation about sword masters and psyche masters in Chang'an City were as numerous as dogs. At that time, Liu Qingchen laughed and said that this argument was absolutely too exaggerated. After entering Chang'an City, Ning Kei had seen cultivators from the South School of Haotian Taoism opening altars and casting spells by the roadside, and had fought with cultivators in Spring Breeze Pavilion with Chao Xiaoshu. However, he really did not expect that an inconspicuous name on the revenge list was actually a powerhouse in that world. Neither Joyer's information nor Sang Sang noticed it. No one could imagine that the former document appraiser of the military ministry and the tea artisan supported by the tea merchants was actually a cultivator who was proficient in sword riding. Ning Kei's tightly knitted eyebrows slowly relaxed. He looked at Yen Suqing in the chair and the hiltless small sword in front of the emaciated middle-aged man, and said with a gentle smile, since you don't want to escape, I will. As soon as he finished his words, he turned around without hesitation and rushed out of the lakeside house like a galloping horse. Yen Suqing looked at the back of the teenager that was about to disappear beside the bamboo wall with great interest. He chuckled and shook his head, saying with emotion, since I've come to kill a cultivator, can I still retreat? The gentle words with strong confidence and killing intent slowly came out from the thin middle-aged man's lips. At the same time, he put down the coarse big teacup in his left hand, rolled up the cuff on his left arm with his right hand, and made a sword formula with the middle and index fingers of his left hand, pointing obliquely to the outside of the lakeside house. His movement was extremely casual and unrestrained. As he pointed obliquely with the middle and index fingers, the dim hiltless small sword on the tea table suddenly hummed in a low voice, as if it was injected with some kind of magical energy. All of a sudden, he turned the long padao in his hand and avoided the sword light coming from the right side of the knight at the cost of a blood mark on his left shoulder. At the same time, he confirmed from the slight vibration coming from his hand that his blade had at least scratched the flying sword. Ning Kei still slightly lowered his head, quietly staring at Yen Suqing sitting in a chair not far away, and carefully listening to the slight buzzing sound in the night around the lakeside house from time to time, trying to determine the position of the flying sword. He took a step forward. A falling bamboo leaf outside the courtyard was torn into two halves by an invisible force. He fell backward like a mountain, and the grey shadow of the sword brushed past his shoulder, but it missed its target. He heavily patted the ground with his right hand, tightened his waist and abdomen, and then stood up again like a mountain. His feet moved as fast as lightning, and the grey sword shadow plunged into the crack of the flagstone in front of his feet, and then quickly flew away again with a buzzing sound, disappearing without a trace. He now stood 3 steps back from the previous position. The small oil lamp on the right side of the tea table glowed faintly, and Yen Suqing sat in a stone chair with a faint smile. The distance between the two was only a few steps, but it was so difficult to cross this distance in the night. Because no one knew where the grey sword shadow was in the night. Holding the long padao hilt tightly with both hands, Ning Ke steadily stepped on the flagstone without stepping on the crack or the protrusion to ensure that he could borrow all the strength of the earth at any time. Like a statue, Ning Ke stared at the tea artist in the chair, with no fear in his eyes, only calmness and concentration. This was the first time in his life that he fought with a cultivator alone. He knew he had no chance, and he was very likely to meet death tonight, so of course he was afraid. But Ning Ke had been tortured by life and death too many times, so he was very clear that fear was the most useless emotion at this time. Only by turning fear and tension into excitement could he turn life and death around. The flying sword buzzed and stabbed at him like lightning. He waved his padao to cut it, and even if he missed, he would avoid the vital parts at the last moment by virtue of the fighting instinct honed on the battlefield and his extremely strong body control. Ding! 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 The sword was like flying light, and the padao was like snow. His body was cut with numerous dense wounds by the sword shadow, and the blood seeped through his shabby clothes and began to drip on the surface of his body, making him look like a bloody man. But Ning Ke still held the padao tightly with both hands, and his feet were like nails on the flagstone. He stared at the powerhouse in the chair without any expression in his eyes, without panic or fear, and even without the fanaticism that should be in a desperate fight. A soldier coming back from the frontier fortress? Yen Suqing gradually stopped smiling, and looked at the bloody lad not far away from him, saying calmly, 14 consecutive sword attacks failed to directly stab you to death, and only left some small wounds on you. Only the frontier fortress soldiers have this kind of physical instinct. But I have to remind you that even if the wounds are small and the blood flow is slow, you will still die after a long time of bleeding. I understand, so I will try to find a chance to cut off your head before the blood runs dry. Ning Ke answered. You won't have such a chance. Yen Suqing looked at Ning Ke sympathetically and shook his head. At this time, the water on the small charcoal stove finally began to boil, and hot water mist sprayed from the mouth of the pot. The tea artist lifted the kettle on the stove with his left hand, and poured the water into the crude teacup. He looked at the tea leaves that kept floating in the boiling water, and lowered his head, saying, I'm going to drink the morning tea, so I won't play with you. There is one more chapter, which is being written. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for it and vote monthly. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 110. In the border town, on the journey, in the old brush pen shop and in many other places, Ning Ke had told Sang Sang many times that even if he couldn't cultivate, he could still chop them into pieces after he mastered the bladesmanship. But at least for now, this seemingly sonorous and forceful declaration could only be spiritual comfort or spiritual stimulation to a large extent. He knew how incredible the powerhouses in the cultivation world were. He had never expected to defeat a cultivator in a face-to-face battle, not to mention the sword master in front of him who had at least stepped into the no-doubt state. This was his first battle with a cultivator. He only had some indirect experience, so he didn't hold much hope. But he wouldn't despair either. He always believed that only the dead needed despair. The water on the charcoal stove gradually boiled, and the steam rose. The boiling water rushed into the teacup. Ning Ke looked at this scene carefully, staring at Yan Suqing's every move, his shoulder, and his hand. He didn't listen to any words that might weaken his fighting will. When he saw this person pour tea, his eyes suddenly brightened. Since he had to hold the teacup, he naturally couldn't pinch the sword formula anymore. Ning Ke tightened his legs that were as firm as nails on the ground, and his body suddenly fell forward. Dragging the long pedal with both hands, he rushed forward with all his strength. Feeling the strong wind blowing on his face and looking at the young soldier dragging the pedal behind him, Yan Suqing showed a mixture of pity and sarcasm in his eyes. He stretched his right hand out of the cuff and spread his fingers in the night wind. There was a loud sound of wind breaking in the lakeside house. It was not the airflow caused by Ning Ke's pouncing body, but the sound of the deep night being torn apart by some kind of power. The dark sword shadow that had disappeared at some unknown place buzzed loudly. It seemed to be in front and suddenly behind, and its position was unpredictable. In an instant, it tore the night and stabbed at Ning Ke's back like lightning. The bamboo leaves rolled up by the wind on the bamboo wall suddenly became quiet, and then scattered in all directions in panic. The hot mist near the charcoal stove suddenly condensed, and then sank to the ground extremely slowly. The time on the stone ground in the courtyard seemed to become much slower. Was this the power of a swordmaster's full blow? Feeling the absolute coldness coming from his back and the sharpness that had already begun to break his heart even before he came into contact with it, Ning Ke sighed with emotion. He knew that the hand of the Grim Reaper was about to touch his back. However, he did not look back, nor did he dodge. He continued to charge forward like a ferocious tiger. He was still running because he knew that there was no way back if he looked back. Dodging at such a close distance would be futile. At this moment, he could only run towards death or run faster than death. Only in this way could he have the last shred of hope. When Ning Ke was 2 steps away from Yan Suqing, he stared at his opponent's neck with his eyes wide open, regardless of the aura of death so close to him. Crossing his hands, he concentrated all his strength on the pedal and fiercely chopped at Yan Suqing. Looking at the fierce blade light coming at his face, Yan Suqing held the teacup in his left hand and just touched his lips, with no expression on his face. In the sea of breath of nature, he clearly saw that the hiltless small sword controlled by his psyche power had already flown to the back of Ning Ke like lightning. Before the blade fell, the lad would die. The pedal in Ning Ke's hand was 3 feet away from Yan Suqing's neck. Yan Suqing's flying sword was 1 foot away from Ning Ke's back. The flying sword controlled by a cultivator was faster than the knife wielded by the best machete men in the world. No matter how he calculated, although Ning Ke bravely fought for a desperate chance, it was a pity that this last fight could only cost his own life, but could not hurt Yan Suqing at all. The next moment, Ning Ke should have died, but he didn't. With the momentum of dragging the pedal and chopping, he quietly loosened his left hand and very naturally reached to his back, grasping a hard object sticking out of the cloth. He grasped the handle of the big black umbrella. His slender and steady fingers grasped the handle of the umbrella and twisted it forcefully. The coarse cloth wrapped around the umbrella suddenly changed shape. The sturdy hard-woven cloth arched and tore in an instant, revealing a few patches of black inside. Those patches of black rotated and tore the cloth, like an ancient dragon that had been lying dormant for a long time raising its head violently from the ground. More and more coarse cloth was torn apart, revealing more and more black. Gradually, the black patches formed a black umbrella surface. The surface of the black umbrella rotated and opened, and its surface area suddenly expanded. It was like a big black flower that was instantly stimulated by the condensed spring wind. With a bang, it covered Ning Ke's back and blocked the dark sword shadow that was buzzing and shrill. Yan Suqing mobilized all his psyche power to make a fatal sword shadow with endless power. However, when the hiltless small sword fiercely stabbed the seemingly ordinary and greasy umbrella surface of the big black umbrella, a very unimaginable follow-up change took place. There was no sound of the umbrella surface tearing, nor was there any sound of fierce collision. When the incomparably sharp flying sword pierced the surface of the black umbrella, it was like a fallen leaf falling into a boundless black swamp, or like a tired mosquito gently landing on the black signboard of the old workshop. The flying sword vibrating and buzzing at high speed seemed to be glued to the big black umbrella surface, and suddenly became absolutely quiet. A moment later, the fallen leaf falling into the boundless black swamp slowly sank without a trace, and the tired mosquito falling on the old black plaque dispiritedly and powerlessly fell to the air, falling to the end of its life. The previously agile and sharp hiltless small sword seemed to have lost all its life in an instant, falling from the big black umbrella surface and slowly falling to the ground. In the world of the chi of heaven and earth, a thread was broken. Yen Suqing's expression suddenly changed, finding that he could not sense his own natal sword. With a shrill roar, he released the coarse teacup with his left hand and put his palms together to clamp the blade of Ning Kei's one hand chopping toward him. There was a hair's width between his palms and Ning Kei's blade, and they did not completely touch each other. However, in that extremely fine space, there seemed to be some kind of power filling it, as tight as cotton. The shrill roar reverberated in the quiet lakeside small house. Hearing the roar, the flying sword that had just fallen to the ground bounced for a while, but could not fly again no matter how hard it tried. It seemed to be extremely miserable and futile, like an old mosquito falling on the frosty ground in late autumn, with its thin wings frozen into glass ice. The so-called struggle was more like the twitching before death. Yen Suqing's eyes were full of killing intent. With another shrill roar, he crossed his palms to slap away the cold blade surface, and then his right hand came out of his sleeve. His body slanted and bounced up from the chair, and he used his fingers as a sword to stab Ning Kei's throat. At this time, the coarse and clumsy teacup fell to the ground heavily, and the ground was covered with black and red ceramic gravel. The hot water mixed with tea leaves scattered in a radial shape, and the white-hot air escaped in a panic. Yen Suqing used his fingers as a sword to stab Ning Kei's throat, and drew an arc slightly to the left, which was a little farther than the direct stab, which also gave Ning Kei the last time to react at the critical moment. He had to do so, because he wanted to avoid the big black umbrella behind Ning Quebec subconsciously. He did not want to touch the big black umbrella, even a little bit. The greasy and dirty surface of the open big black umbrella looked darker and darker than the darkness before dawn in the lakeside small house. Yen Suqing did not know what the big black umbrella was. But as a sword master who had been immersed in the cultivation world for many years and had made progress in the past 10 years after he quit the military ministry and hid among the tea-scented clay pottery, he could vaguely feel the fear brought to him by the big black umbrella, which was the instinctive fear of cultivators. It was because of the deepest fear in his heart that Yen Suqing's finger sword was a little slower than usual. It was also in this extremely short time that Ning Kei had time to move the black umbrella to the left side of his body. At this time, the big black umbrella, which had been completely opened, had a large surface area. Like a big black flower floating on the lake, it obediently slid from Ning Kei's right shoulder to his left shoulder, and then covered his entire body. Yen Suqing's fingers poked on the surface of the big black umbrella fiercely. The feeling of poking on the surface of the black umbrella was a little slippery, sticky and disgusting. Yen Suqing stared at the place where his fingertips touched the surface of the black umbrella. The deep fear in his heart surged out, his body trembled violently, and his face became extremely pale in an instant. He was extremely shocked to find that the psyche power in his body and the chi of heaven and earth mobilized by his psyche power were also surging out along with the inner fear. The big black umbrella was like the deepest and most boundless night, which would swallow all the light. Yen Suqing didn't expect that he would be forced into such a situation by an ordinary person and a seemingly ordinary big black umbrella. But he knew that he had been forced to the edge of the cliff of life and death. He didn't withdraw his finger sword, because as soon as the light entered the night, the winner must be decided. It was either day or night. Before or after sunrise and sunset, no one could leave in advance. A shrill and unpleasant howl burst out from his lips. The cultivator who had hidden among the people for more than 10 years finally broke out the most extreme strength. He exerted his psyche power at a terrifying speed and dispersed it around his body through the snow mountain and ocean of chi. He mobilized all the chi of heaven and earth that could be sensed in the lakeside small building, condensed it in front of his fingers, and turned it into sword style to stab the black umbrella. The overbearing and sharp sword power of the cultivator was transmitted from the surface of the big black umbrella to the handle, and then to Ning Kei's hand holding the handle. He lowered his head and stabilized the black umbrella with his left hand and shoulder blade. Listening to the cracking sound coming from his wrist bone and feeling the terrible power borne by his body, he clenched his teeth and didn't retreat. At this time, he was like a Tang soldier with the big black umbrella as a shield and a knife behind him, standing in the forefront of the decisive battle on the grassland, desperately resisting the violent attack of the barbarian tribes outside the shield. He couldn't retreat, for once he retreated, he would be defeated. Everyone from the frontier army of the Tang Empire had such a sense of discipline and courage. At this time, he concentrated all his spirit and strength on the handle of the umbrella to contend against Yan Suqing's finger sword which was condensed with his lifelong cultivation. Besides, he faintly felt that something very precious in his body was constantly flowing away along the umbrella handle and into the surface of the big black umbrella. So he couldn't lift the pedal behind him with his right hand at all. With his finger on the umbrella and his body inside, the deadly stalemate lasted for a long time. The chi of heaven and earth surged in the lakeside small building and condensed in front of Yan Suqing's finger, turning into a very short and sharp sword intent that stabbed fiercely. Whether it was the dancing bamboo leaves or the gradually cooling water mist, they all seemed to feel the tense atmosphere in the field. Yan Qingsu snorted slightly, and the blue veins on his pale face appeared and then disappeared. The big black umbrella retreated a little. The umbrella handle slipped away from Ning Kei's left hand and hit his head hard. Finally, a trace of the extremely sharp sword style succeeded in penetrating the surface of the big black umbrella and pierced in from the point where the handle collided. With a puff, blood spurted out from Ning Kei's mouth and nose, spreading along the edge of the mask and dyeing his tender face red. On the other side of the black umbrella, Yan Suqing's eyes also began to drip blood, and the light in his eyes gradually dimmed. He had squeezed out too much psyche power and was almost exhausted. Now it all depended on who could hold on longer. The handle of the big black umbrella pressed on Ning Kei's chest like a mountain, and blood kept gushing out from his mouth and nose. The mask had been completely soaked with blood, and the blood kept dripping along the edge of the mask and onto his shoes. He raised his head with great difficulty, and his listless eyes brushed the edge of the black umbrella, looking at the tea master outside the umbrella. He found that Yan Suqing's thin cheeks had become even thinner at this time, and his eyes were deeply sunken. It seemed that he couldn't hold on much longer. All of a sudden, Ning Kei felt the power coming from the umbrella handle weakened a little. He suddenly raised his head, holding the umbrella handle tightly with his left hand, and pushing against the handle with his chest, he forced himself to take a step forward. The big black umbrella was like an indestructible big shield, pushing Yan Suqing back a step. A fierce howl of grassland beasts fighting brutally came out of the youth's mouth. He mobilized the last trace of strength in his body, lifted the pedao dragged on the ground, and fiercely chopped at Yan Suqing. With a crack, the blade deeply penetrated into the depths of Yan Suqing's neck, and then continued to move forward with an extremely horrible sound of bones breaking and flesh breaking, until it came out from the other side. The pair of eyes on Yan Suqing's head stared at the teenager behind the black umbrella in disbelief. Then, his head tilted and fell from his neck, bounced twice on the ground, and rolled into the tea that was still giving off steam. The big black umbrella slowly fell down, and the umbrella handle was still tightly held in Ning Kei's hand. Ning Kei stared at the head on the ground, gasping rapidly, and said, "You're used to being a tea master, so you're no longer a sword master, because you even forgot to invite a valet." The darkness before dawn was so deep, and Chang'an was so quiet at this time. There were no pedestrians on the streets, not even a cat that was used to walking at night. A youth covered in blood ran out of a square in southern city. He staggered and ran, and sometimes his weak legs couldn't support him, so he fell heavily on the ground. Blood kept dripping from the edge of the mask. He felt that his sight was a little blurred, and even his mind was a little confused. He didn't know where he was, because of excessive blood loss or other reasons. If I want to take your life, I will definitely take your life. He subconsciously murmured, looking for the way home. The voice came out of the mask that was soaked and stuck with blood, and seemed a little distorted. He had heard the siren before, and the remaining reason made him know that he had to leave here as soon as possible. The government had been alarmed, and if Chang and City sent out the Yulin royal guards, he would only have a dead end. So he continued to run wildly on the Vermilion Bird Avenue that he didn't recognize. The black umbrella tied to his back was bounced up from time to time, and then opened, puff after puff. The vengeful youth covered in blood. The evil ghost that crawled back from the underworld. A black lotus grew on his back. I've written for 10 hours, and I'm finally satisfied with writing to this point. F***CK. I'm not going to write a single chapter. By the way, I need everyone's recommendation and support on Monday. I didn't want to ask for monthly votes, but this chapter is so good that I feel sorry for myself if I don't take this opportunity to ask for monthly votes. Good night. I'll continue with the next 3 chapters after I wake up, and I'll make sure to write the best 3 chapters. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 111. Ning Ke ran in the night and on the street. From time to time, he raised his right arm to wipe off the blood on his chin. The big black umbrella hit his back from time to time, making a cracking sound. As time went by, the luster in his eyes became dimmer and dimmer. His eyebrows that were exposed outside the mask became tighter and tighter, looking like he was in great pain. His vision became more and more blurred. In his eyes, the posts for tying horses and the archway at the entrance of the marketplace gradually became distorted and turned into monsters baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. His breathing became more and more rapid. The air that was squeezed out of his lungs was as hot as lava, but the air that he desperately inhaled was as cold as a glacier. His footsteps became more and more sluggish, and he often stumbled on the protruding bluestone slabs on the ground. His thoughts became more and more chaotic, and he gradually forgot his current situation. He only remembered that he should run, as far as possible. Some deep instinct urged him to run in the direction of the old brush pen shop on Lin 47th Street. Perhaps only after seeing that dark and swarthy little girl would he feel safe and proper. This obsession to run home was so strong. It was so strong that it supported his seriously injured and weak body to run from South City to here. It was so strong that he didn't even notice that he was running on the Vermilion Bird Avenue, which usually made him the most vigilant and uneasy. The blood that dripped from the edge of the mask could be wiped off by his sleeves. The blood that oozed from the numerous sword wounds on his body slowly flowed to the big black umbrella. It was slowly absorbed by the sticky and greasy surface of the umbrella and then slowly released. It slowly dripped to the ground, and then a tiny blood flower bloomed on the ground and seeped into the cracks of the stones. Before dawn, there was a morning breeze, blowing the clothes that were drying under someone's eaves and making the dragon cloud flag that towered into the clouds in the distance on the Vermilion Bird Avenue flutter. The footsteps in the morning breeze and the faint smell of blood blended together, gradually awakening some life that had been hiding in the cracks of the stones for thousands of years. The spacious and straight Vermilion Bird Avenue in Chang and of the Tang Empire suddenly became a long and endless hell-fire path. Ning Ke felt as if his feet were stepping on extremely hot red pebbles. Every step he took would burn through the soles of his shoes. Those bursting flames instantly spread and burned his flesh and bones. It was extremely painful. He was still running, taking one step after another. Every step he took was excruciating. With every step he took, he felt like his feet were being chopped into meat paste by countless knives. Suddenly, his body froze on the spot and he clutched his chest in pain. He felt as if an invisible spear had fallen from the night sky, piercing through his flesh, bones, and internal organs, penetrating his body and pinning him to the ground. The burning pain from the ground of Vermilion Bird Avenue instantly disappeared, because compared to the pain that came from his chest, that pain that seemed to want to tear everything apart and destroy everything, no pain in the world was worth mentioning. Ning Ke furrowed his brows painfully. He looked at his empty chest, the street that had been transformed into some kind of curved corridor, and Chang and city that had nothing to do with reality. He found that everything in his eyes had countless shadows, real and illusory, fake and deconstructed shadows, and he was standing between the real and illusory shadows of these things. Suddenly, he heard someone gasping softly beside his ear. Using the last of his strength, he turned his head and tightly grasped the hilt of the knife at his waist with his bloody hand. However, he did not see any trace of anyone, and he was still surrounded by those strange, deformed worlds. His face was as pale as a snow mountain. He looked around in confusion and subconsciously tried to find the source of the gasp. The stone posts that seemed to be about to fall to the ground were gasping, telling of the pain and annoyance of being tied by the neck every day. The yellow cloth of the wine shop in the market was gasping in the morning wind, telling of the unhappiness and uneasiness of being molested by drunkards every night. The locust tree that stretched out its waste in a house was gasping, telling of the fact that it had seen too many family secrets and was about to dry up. The green leaf that fell under the stone lion's seat was gasping, telling of the reason why it did not fall at the right time. The stone lion was gasping, the wooden building was gasping, the road under their feet was gasping, the morning wind was gasping, the distant imperial palace was gasping, the nearby grey wall was gasping, Chang'an was gasping, and the whole world was gasping. The delicate and charming gasps were like the moans of women, the long and continuous gasps were like the solemn gasps of the court, the anxious gasps were like the desperate gasps of a fugitive, and the indifferent gasps were like the ruthless gasps of history. Ning Ke listened to the gasps coming from all directions in the narrow streets, alleys, back gardens, and distant halls. He stood alone and helpless in the middle of the street. He loosened the hilt of the knife and covered his ears with both hands, but he still could not stop the various gasps from penetrating the back of his palms and clearly and powerfully entering his mind. He slowly knelt down in the middle of the dark Vermilion Bird Avenue and then fell down. The big black umbrella covered his back. The blood passed through the black umbrella, dripped on the bluestone, and flowed into the cracks of the stones. On the Vermilion Bird Avenue, which was paved with bluestone, there were countless tiny flowers made of tiny blood drops. From the south city all the way to the north, the blood flowers connected into a line, faintly connecting with the blood at the front of the black umbrella. The place where the blood line was pointing was the stone sculpture of the vermilion bird at the far end of the avenue. The vermilion bird engraved in the middle of the imperial road was deeply carved into the stone. It carried the history of the Tang Empire for more than 1,000 years. No one knew how many high-spirited new kings it had welcomed, and no one knew how many old heroes who ultimately failed to defeat time had been sent away. Its majestic eyes were always so calm and never moved for a moment. At this time, the eyes of the vermilion bird were still majestic as usual. However, the right wing of the three indescribably gorgeous top wings on top of its head slowly rose, as if it was going to break through the stone surface and enter the real world. Ning Ke fell unconscious under the big black umbrella. He had no idea that the vermilion bird in the distance had undergone such a strange change, nor did he know that a majestic and irresistible sense of destruction that seemed to come from ancient times had enveloped him. His blood flowed between the cracks of the stones, extremely shallow and flat, even shallower and flatter than what humans could imagine. It flowed from the middle of the avenue to the distance, flowing into the complicated and solemn feather stone crevices of the vermilion bird in the distance. Silently, the blood that flowed into the beautiful feather stone crevices of the Vermilion Bird Avenue quickly evaporated into a light red mist, and then was quickly purified by an invisible high-temperature power into an invisible void. The blood drops scattered on the bluestone slabs of the Vermilion Bird Avenue also began to evaporate and be purified, disappearing into nothingness one by one. The extremely shallow and flat blood between the stone crevices continued to evaporate and disappear at a speed visible to the naked eye, until finally it came under the big black umbrella and directly invaded Ning Kei's body along with the blood. The invisible scorching aura seemed to be able to incinerate everything in the world. The blood on Ning Kei's body quickly evaporated and disappeared without a trace, but his clothes did not change at all. His arms that were exposed outside his clothes and his cheeks that were exposed outside the mask began to quickly turn red, and the hair on his forehead quickly turned yellow and withered. His fingernails that rested on the bluestone began to become dry and crisp due to the rapid loss of water. A green leaf was blown up by the morning wind and fell on the back of his hand. Then it was brushed off again, still green and pleasing. An ant was disturbed by the fallen leaves and climbed up the back of his hand, and then climbed down from the other side, still alive. But if nothing unexpected happened, Ning Kei would be burned alive by the mysterious invisible flame released by the Vermilion Bird in the next moment. At this moment, a shadow descended and crushed the pitiful ant to death with a light smack. The big black umbrella, blown by the morning wind, gently covered Ning Kei's body, gently swaying like a black lotus. With the swaying of the black umbrella, the green leaf was instantly frozen into ice and scattered into countless tiny pieces of ice when the morning wind gently brushed it. An absolutely cold aura was gradually released from the black umbrella, slowly and unstoppably seeping into Ning Kei's hot body. After a moment, the redness on his cheeks and arms gradually faded and became snow white after a serious injury. The hair on his forehead quickly became black and glossy, and the fingernails on his hands that rested on the bluestone regained their luster. The Vermilion Bird on the stone street in the distance seemed to sense something. Its majestic and solemn eyes were obviously calm as usual, but it gave people a feeling that it was looking in the direction where Ning Kei was lying down. After a moment, the three indescribably gorgeous top wings on its head all rose up. Almost at the same time, the big black umbrella covering Ning Kei's body swayed even faster. The black wind was blowing in the black wilderness. The strong wind rolled up the black gravel and scattered it everywhere in the sky, so that it seemed that the light of the scorching sun in the sky had turned black. There was a black snow mountain in the distance of the wilderness, which was constantly melting and collapsing under the illumination of the black scorching sun. The melted snow water mixed with the black soil and gravel, reflecting the black sunlight and rushing around violently. The black snow mountain was about to collapse, and the flood it formed was about to destroy the whole world. But at this moment, the bright night suddenly came to the world, releasing an incomparably warm and cold aura. Ning Kei stood at a certain point in this space, looking at the magnificent scene of destruction in front of him with confusion and incomparable calmness. He did not know where this place was, but he knew that this was not a dream. This feeling was clear and firm, just as he clearly saw the light occupying most of the sky, but he was sure that it was night. The bright night covered most of the sky, blocking the blazing black sunlight and gradually slowing down the melting of the snow mountain. And the cold aura emitted from the bright night sky began to condense the raging flood in the black wilderness, turning it into dancing black ice and unwilling black snow. The whole world was reshaping, and the black snow mountain slowly and unstoppably stood up again. The world returned to peace, and the night returned to the color that night should have. The glaciers and snow rivers in the wilderness disappeared, as if nothing had changed, but also as if everything had changed. The sun in the sky warmly shone on the world, and the spring light melted the snow on the other side of the snow mountain. The gurgling water seeped into the depths of the snow, fell into the blue and dark underground ice cave, and then disappeared. After an unknown number of years, in a place far away from the snowy mountains in the wilderness, a pebble gently trembled and was pushed to the side. Then, a trickle of water gushed out and gradually spread out, flowing towards the horizon. On the bank of the river, there was a weak but strong blade of grass. Damn, this chapter seems to take 6 hours. I can only vomit blood and accept it. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 112. The world disappeared, and Ning Ke woke up. He looked at the corpses of ants in front of him, which were scattered into a pile of green leaves and ice gravel. After a while, he struggled to get up. He didn't know how long he had been in a coma. It might be long or short, but he knew it was very dangerous to lie in the middle of the street. Listening to the faint sound of bamboo flute and horse hooves, he bit his lower lip hard, forced himself to cheer up, and ran into an alley on the side with his tired and wounded body. The blood on the bluestone street had disappeared without a trace. It was clean as if it had been washed by rain dozens of times and dried by the warm spring sun. He didn't notice where the blood on his body had gone. It was clean as if he had just taken a bath in the House of Red Sleeves for half a night. He only had a vague impression of what had happened when he was in a coma. He had no memory of the magical fight between the vermilion bird and the big black umbrella at the end of the street. Walking into the side alley, he quickly took off his outer shirt that was full of sword cuts. Only then did he notice that there was not a single trace of blood on his outer shirt. He was slightly startled and looked down at his body with difficulty. Indeed, there was not a single trace of blood. He could not help but have a strong suspicion in his heart. However, the situation was urgent and the government had been alerted. He had no time to think, so he directly tore off a piece of cloth and hung it on a branch. Then he threw the outer shirt into a house behind the wall. The pain in his chest was still unbearable. The invisible spear that came from the heavens seemed to still be stuck in his chest. Every step he took made his face paler. Even the slightest tremble made him feel like the tear in his heart was getting bigger. He stretched out his trembling hand and put it on a low wall. Then he jumped in with strength from his waist and abdomen. He quietly passed by a resident who was still sleeping in the cool morning. He took a cyan unlined shirt from a bamboo pole and quickly put it on. He had prepared the best medicine for wounds, but when he was putting on his clothes, he took a quick look and was surprised to find that the bloody wounds caused by the flying swords on the surface of his body had already healed. This kind of healing was not a true recovery. It looked more like someone had used fire to forcefully scorch his body. Only the bleeding had stopped, but the injuries were still there. Ning Ke made his way through the streets and alleys of the eastern city of Chang and in the last of the night. From time to time, he would hide behind trees and climb to the top of eaves to avoid the approaching hooves of horses and the sharper sounds of bamboo flutes. When he finally got close to Lin 47th Street, he found that he couldn't go back to the old brush pen shop to treat his wounds, because the yamen runners of the Chang and local government with iron rulers and ropes had begun to knock on every door to inquire. Ning Ke frowned as he looked at those shop doors that had been knocked open. He raised his hand to cover his mouth and forcibly suppressed the strong urge to cough. He stepped back into the shadow of the alley and leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. An ordinary-looking carriage appeared at the entrance of the alley, with the Academy's logo printed on the shaft. Ning Ke hid in the darkness and stared at the horse carriage that took him to the Academy every day. He listened carefully to the sounds of shops opening in the alley from time to time and silently counted the time in his heart. He kicked the wall with his tired right foot and exerted the last strength of his weak body. He rushed into the alley and opened the door of the carriage with his right hand as fast as lightning. The yamen runner who was questioning the owner of the old antique shop in the alley vaguely saw something out of the corner of his eye. He turned his head in astonishment and found that there was no one at the entrance of the alley except for a horse carriage quietly parked there. Why is there a horse carriage parked here so early? The yamen runner frowned and muttered to himself, ready to go and have a look. The owner of the antique shop, who was wearing a thin coat, yawned and glanced at the horse carriage at the entrance of the alley. He explained casually, "That's the horse carriage that takes Boss Ning to the academy. It's waiting here every day at this time." Hearing the word academy, the Yamen runner stopped and laughed at himself. He turned around to look at the owner of the antique shop and said with emotion, "It's really rare that someone from our street can enter the academy." In the horse carriage, Ning Ke watched the Yamen runner and the owner of the antique shop talking at the stone steps. After confirming that there was no problem, he put down the curtain and gently knocked on the window lattice. He said in a tired voice, "Old Duan, we can go now." The coachman, Old Duan, was startled and turned around to look at Ning Ke behind the curtain. He said in surprise, "Boss Ning. When did you get on the carriage? Why didn't I know? You're up early today." "I didn't review the lesson plan of the etiquette department yesterday, so I'm in a hurry to go to the academy to read it again," Ning Ke explained in a low voice. Then his expression changed slightly. He lowered his body and coughed violently, hurriedly covering his mouth with his sleeve. Listening to the suppressed but heart-wrenching coughing in the carriage, the coachman asked with concern, "Are you all right?" Ning Ke answered, "It was too hot last night. I gluttonous ate 2 bowls of ice and washed several buckets of well water. I think I caught a cold." The coachman turned around and held the reins with one hand and gently waved the whip with the other. He said with a smile, "Heat is the most troublesome. But you're young and vigorous. You'll be fine after drinking some cooling tea when you get back to the shop." Hearing the word vigorous, Ning Ke did not know why his heart palpitated. He was slightly startled and looked down at his sleeve. He found that it was stained with 2 smears of blood that he coughed up, so he gently held the corner of the sleeve in his hand. The southern city of Chang'an was a noble place, and the lakeside house was even more noble. People who were qualified to live in such a place were either rich or noble. Although Yen Suqing, the tea master, was not allowed in the imperial court, he still had some fame in the upper circle of celebrities. The previous deadly fight in the lakeside house had already alarmed other lakeside residents. When they found that Yen Suqing, the tea master, was beheaded, the Chang'an local government and even the Yulin royal guards immediately began a serious investigation. At this time, the city gate had just opened, which was a good time to block the murderer in the city. The local government runners of the Chang'an local government inquired everywhere, the Yulin royal guards guarded the streets, and the inspection at the city gate was extremely strict. But no matter how strict the inspection was, there were still some differences. At least for the carriage with the logo of the academy, which was responsible for sending students to study in the academy, the solemn city gate guard just casually asked a few questions, and then lifted the curtain to take a look, and then waved his hand to let go. Ning Ke lifted the curtain and looked at the whole of the city gate, thinking that if the bloodstains on his body had not been completely annihilated, it would have been really difficult for him to pass today. At this time, he did not know that the bloodstains on the Vermilion Bird Avenue had also been completely evaporated and purified, leaving no trace. Otherwise, the cavalrymen of the Yulin Royal Guards would have already followed the bloodstains to catch up with him, who was exhausted and seriously injured. With the sound of hooves and wheels, the first ray of morning light fell on Chang'an City, shining on the young boy's innocent cheeks, which made his pale face even paler. He could not help but squint his eyes, thinking of the black sunshine in that world and the many puzzling things that happened to him tonight. He subconsciously shook his head, and then hid the knife under the board of the carriage. When the carriage arrived at the academy, Ning Ke slowly and calmly walked into the academy. The stone path, which used to be lush with flowers and grass, seemed so long today, and every step was so painful. In order to not let others see his injuries and abnormalities, he had to endure no matter how severe the pain in his chest was, and could not even raise his eyebrows. Ning Ke could not attend classes in such a state. He knew that if he insisted on attending classes, it was very likely that he would spit out a mouthful of blood and die on the spot in front of the instructors and classmates. Therefore, he directly passed through the quiet side alley of the academy, and slowly walked across the wetland in the morning light, coming to the front of the old library. The old library was open to students day and night. It was still early at this time, and neither the instructors nor the 4 deacons were in. Ning Ke pushed the back of the building, and then slowly climbed upstairs with his right hand on the wall. When he arrived at the familiar second floor, Ning Ke was silent for a moment as he looked at the dense cultivation books on the bookshelves. Suddenly, he had a strong urge to read, because he had a very ominous feeling. This would be the last time in his life to go upstairs, and also the last chance to read these precious books. In the end, he did not take out the books from the bookshelves to read, nor did he have the energy to see if the guy named Chen Pippi had left a message. He wearily walked to the end of the bookshelves, walked to the floor under the west window, and sat down. Later, the female professor would come to copy her hairpin-style small regular script, right? If she saw him like this, how could he explain to her? Perhaps later he would close his eyes and never wake up again, so why bother to explain? Because of the excessive blood loss, and also because of the mysterious injuries and collisions inside his body, Ning Ke's thoughts were extremely chaotic. He was like those willow catkins floating in the spring wind, light as a feather, without any strength and direction. He looked down at his chest, feeling the feeling of emptiness and the unbearable tearing pain in the emptiness. Subconsciously, he raised his trembling right hand and slowly touched it. Ning Ke did not touch the spear from the sky, nor did he touch the blood, but he felt that his hand was full of sticky blood, and he was very sure that his chest was indeed pierced by the spear. An invisible big hole. Was he going to die inexplicably like this? Ning Ke thought painfully, and at the same time, he felt endless sleepiness in his mind. He felt that his eyelids had become as heavy as lead, and he kept trying to close them. He untied the big black umbrella behind him and gently put it beside him. Then, he wearily leaned against the wall behind him, slowly closed his eyes, and let out a relaxed sigh. His legs were naturally relaxed and opened. Just like that rainy day when Joyer sat under the grey wall. Soft footsteps came from the building, and the slender female professor slowly walked over. Seeing Ning Ke sitting under the wall, her eyebrows slowly furrowed, and her eyes fell on the big black umbrella beside the lad. The female professor looked at the big black umbrella and slightly frowned. When she looked at Ning Ke again, there was a trace of interest and inquiry on her tranquil face. What made the vermilion bird angry? Is it you, or this big black umbrella? She calmly looked at the lad on the verge of death. Somehow, she did not want to help him, but just sighed softly and regretfully said, speaking of which, I'm really curious. Why does a poor lad with no cultivation potential have so many secrets that even I can't see through? Because of the promise, I can't help you. Otherwise, I really want to see what you will become after you come back to life. The female professor's eyes were clear and beautiful, showing a kind of childish beauty that did not match her age. She looked at Ning Ke on the ground and said, I will ask for leave for you, and hope that Haotian can give you luck and let you live. If you can't survive this time, don't blame me. Blame yourself for appearing 1 or 2 years too early. After a while, she brought a bowl of water and 2 steamed buns and put them beside him. Then, she returned to the desk by the east window and continued to write hairpin-style small regular script, as if she did not know that there was a dying lad not far behind her. Outside the window, the morning light gradually became brighter, and the cicadas chirped. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 113. Although the people of the Tang Empire were ferocious, Chang'an was the most benevolent city. Numerous imperial courts, government offices, and military camps were scattered in the city. High officials and nobles lived in the city, so the security was very good. Except for a few corpses in a duel of life and death, there were very few cases of abnormal deaths in Chang'an. Of course, the murder at the Spring Breeze Pavilion, which was approved by His Majesty in the palace, was not included. Therefore, when the murder happened at the lakeside in the southern city, the Chang and local government suddenly became nervous in the morning. The new judicial military adjunct and the coroner squatted in the autopsy room and did not dare to go out. The head on duty led more than 100 government runners to run between the streets, sweating profusely. The current magistrate of Chang'an, Shengguan Yangyu, who had just gotten up, looked extremely gloomy. "Your Honor, the murderer must be an experienced killer. We searched around the murder scene but found no clues. We only found a piece of clothing in the side alley of the Vermilion Bird Avenue. I guess it was left by the murderer." The criminal official in charge of investigating major and important cases respectfully handed over the tattered coat and another piece of cloth in his hand, saying, "It's not that my subordinates are incompetent, the Yulin royal guards have also lost them." Shengguan Yangyu took the ragged coat and then looked at the piece of cloth against the morning light coming in from outside the hall. His triangular eyes shrunk so much that they almost turned into two soybeans, but he couldn't find anything. He said in a hoarse voice, "Ask the old man to check this coat. If he can't find any clues about the material, then focus on the needlework. This is a ready-made garment from the lawn embroidery workshop." Someone had knocked on the door and asked. This ready-made garment of this style and size was produced a few years ago and sold many pieces. This one is obviously old, so. The subordinate looked up at the expression on his honor's face and said carefully, "Neither the needlework or the material of the garment can be checked." Shengguan Yangyu gently stroked his sparse beard and said indifferently without any expression on his face, "The imperial court keeps us officials to do things. If it's not easy to check, shouldn't we?" After hesitating for a moment, the subordinate came forward and said in a low voice, "Sir, the coat left behind by the murderer has been cut countless times by the blade of the sword, but there is no trace of blood on it. According to this subordinate's judgment, there are only two possibilities." "Say it." Shengguan Yuyang said angrily, annoyed at his slowness. "The first possibility is that the murderer is wearing a very expensive soft armor, but look at the rips on the clothes, especially the places where the rips are. Even the best soft armor in the empire can't protect those places." The subordinate glanced at him again and lowered his voice even more. "Then there is only the second possibility. This murderer is an expert at the peak of martial arts. Ordinary weapons or even flying swords can only cut open his outer clothes, but can't penetrate his protective yuan qi layer at all, so naturally there is no blood." Shengguan Yangyu's fingers that were stroking his beard suddenly froze when he heard the words, "strong man at the peak of martial arts." He looked at his subordinate with cold eyes. A strong man of martial arts who could resist the flying sword of a sword master with only his protective primordial qi must be very fierce. There were not many such strong men in the whole empire. Nonsense. Shengguan Yangyu stared at his subordinate's eyes coldly and said coldly, "The four generals with outstanding achievements are the strongest men at the peak of martial arts in the Tang Empire. Not to mention that the four generals are ordered by the emperor to guard the frontier all year round, even if they are now in Chang'an City. Do you think they will commit murder?" The subordinate bowed again and again, indicating that he didn't mean that. If it is a strong man at the peak of martial arts from a foreign country, it is even more impossible. Shengguan Yangyu said with a gloomy face, "Once such people enter Chang'an City, the imperial court will closely monitor them. If they dare to do anything, aren't they afraid that the nation master will directly suppress them? This is impossible, that is impossible, then what is possible?" The subordinate complained in his heart and raised his head to look at his honor expectantly, thinking that he had to show them a way. According to the regular procedure, the lakeside murder case will be archived first, and then you will investigate the case diligently and strive to solve the case as soon as possible. Shengguan Yangyu said slowly, and the hidden meaning in his words was very clear. The so-called strive to solve the case as soon as possible, the key was to strive. Even if you could not solve the case as soon as possible, as long as no one in the imperial court questioned you, no one would care. Looking at the subordinate who took the order and retreated, Shengguan Yangyu shook his head and took out a handkerchief from his sleeve to wipe the sweat on his face. His slightly red nose suddenly became redder because of the wipe. Hearing that the real murderer of the murder case was very likely to be a strong man at the peak of martial arts, the new prefectural magistrate of Chang'an City had the intention to retreat, because he knew that this matter must be very troublesome. As a senior official of the Tang Empire, although Shangguan Yangyu had a despicable temperament, he was not so weak that he could not even bear this responsibility. But he knew that if this murder case involved a lot of people, it was not a problem that could be solved by the Chang'an local government alone. If other departments did not take action, it meant that someone in the imperial court did not want to make trouble. His Majesty is very benevolent. He cupped his hands in front and bowed respectfully to the far north. His ugly face was full of gratitude. His Majesty has promoted me from the judicial military staff to the prefectural magistrate of Chang'an City. How dare I make trouble for His Majesty? There was an old tower made of yellow bricks in the southern city. The tower was badly damaged and entangled with green vines. It seemed that it would collapse at any time. However, after so many years, the old tower still stood among the small temples. It was silent and peaceful, watching others build tall buildings and others build brothels. Every spring, countless wild geese returned from the south. Before the geese went to Xuanyang Lake in Gushan Commandery to spend the summer, they would fly over Chang'an City and circle around the old tower for many days. At that time, the shadows of the geese would cover the sky and the birds would sing. It was a spectacular scene. No one knew why these wild geese, who flew high in the sky and slept by the water, would appear in the bustling Chang'an City and be so interested in the old tower. But after a long time, they got used to it. In recent years, the scene of tens of thousands of flying geese had become another wonderful scene for the people of Chang'an to enjoy the spring. And the old tower also had a name, Wanyan Tower. Today, there was a monk living at the top of the Wanyan Tower, accompanied by the lamp and the Buddha statue in the shrine and the scriptures on the table. He rarely went down from the tower and rarely met the good Zen women in the back garden. This monk called himself Huang Yang, the younger brother of the Tang Empire's emperor. Today, he welcomed a guest who was equally distinguished. Li Qingshan, the nation master of Tang, looked at the monk who was copying scriptures at the table and said, "Last night, the vermilion bird woke up." Monk Huang Yang replied calmly without raising his head, "The divine object left by the previous generation of sages has its own meaning. How can it be known to us ordinary people who are still trapped in the world of mortals? Brother Qingshan, why bother yourself? I have to finish a chapter. Otherwise, this writing method, with 3 chapters and each chapter is painstakingly written, will kill me. Besides, this chapter only has 2,000 words. That's because the last chapter yesterday had 4,000 words. So, I'm not cheating, right? Tonight, I'll try my best to finish it as soon as possible. I'll bow and spit out blood. The blood on your shoes. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 114. Li Qingshan replied indifferently, "Since I'm in the secular world, how can I not be disturbed by its atmosphere?" Monk Huang Yang slowly raised his head to look at him and suddenly said something irrelevant, "Since His Majesty is in the palace, why aren't you in the palace? Rules are inanimate, and people can't be bound by inanimate things. His Majesty is in the palace most of the time. Do I have to be detained in the palace every day? You can hide in the Wanyan Tower to cultivate every day, but I, as the leader of the South School of Haotian Taoism, also have many things to do. Moreover, who in Chang'an City can harm His Majesty? The South School of Haotian Taoism." Monk Huang Yang repeated in a low voice with an inexplicable smile on his face. He sighed softly and said, "Our Tang Empire has forcibly separated the South School from Haotian Taoism. I really don't know how you can resist the anger of those great divine priests when you return to West Hill every year." Li Qingshan said proudly, "I close my eyes, sit on the divine hall, and don't look at the old faces of those martial uncles. I'm deaf, and stand on the peach mountain without peach trees, and don't listen to the solemn bell in the deep mountain. The South School has paid a penny of silver every year. What else do they want? Do they really want to condemn me as a traitor and kill me? Then those old Taoists in West Hill must destroy our Tang Empire first. Monk Huang Yang smiled and said nothing more. The South School of Haotian Taoism was the product of balance between the Tang Empire and the West Hill Divine Palace. In fact, it represented the biggest victory of the Tang Empire in the secular religious war. The longer it existed in the world, the more embarrassed those Taoist sublime beings in West Hill would be. Monk Huang Yang cultivated the skills of Buddhism, so it was really not suitable for him to express too many opinions on this kind of thing. Vermilion Bird woke up last night. Li Qingshan brought the conversation back to the original topic, looked at Monk Huang Yang coldly and said, whether I want to disturb myself or not, I have disturbed many people. As the nation master of Tang, it's impossible for me to face the questions of the imperial court without giving an answer. Monk Huang Yang looked at the Buddhist scriptures on the table in front of him and the bright red ink marks moistened with cinnabar. After a moment of silence, he replied, so you come to me to find the answer. Before Vermilion Bird woke up, a sword master in the southern city was beheaded. The tower was cramped. Li Qingshan made his way around the small, wooden table and arrived beside the tower in just 2 steps. His gaze passed through the tiny, glazed window and gazed out of the tower. He passed through the forest and the summer heat, landing on the steaming south of the city. The dead swordsman used to be a document appraiser for the military. Only a few people knew that he was a disciple of West Hill and that his sword formula came from Haotian Taoism. That's not the point. I'm not interested in denouncing the empire on behalf of the West Hill martial uncles. What I'm interested in is that the sword master tore the murderer's clothes before he died, but the murderer didn't bleed. Upon hearing this, Monk Huang Yang seemed to be lost in thought and slowly replied, an expert at the peak of martial arts. Li Qingshan turned his head and tucked his sleeves behind him. He looked at the monk quietly and said, it's impossible for the martial arts masters of the empire to make a move. The martial arts masters of the South Jin Kingdom, the Great River Kingdom, and the Yen Kingdom are all under the surveillance of the imperial court. Therefore, the possibility of this happening is very small. Therefore, I suspect that the ascetic monks of the Yueluan Kingdom have snuck in and gone crazy. That's why you came to ask me. Monk Huang Yang smiled and repeated what he had said before. It's said in the world that you have been to the unknown place in the wilderness. I know it's not a legend, but a true story. In that case, I certainly have to ask you about the ascetic monks of the Yueluan Kingdom. I'm from the Pingzhou prefecture of the Tang Empire. Monk Huang Yang stopped smiling and replied quietly, and I don't believe that the monks of the Yueluan Kingdom would take the risk of sneaking into Chang'an City to kill people for no reason. Then how do you explain the bloodless clothes on the murderer's clothes? Li Qingshan looked into his eyes and asked. Monk Huang Yang's eyes were peaceful and he replied slowly, the vermilion bird wakes up due to anger and condenses the breath of heaven and earth into the nameless fire. The fire is powerful enough to burn everything, let alone some sticky blood stains. Maybe the murderer has already been burned to ashes. This younger brother of the emperor of the Tang Empire, a monk who had advanced in Dharma, was really amazing. He had actually guessed the truth of the matter so easily. However, this couldn't completely explain all the problems. Li Qingshan frowned and asked, even if you and I do our best, we can probably only make the painting lazily open its eyes to take a look. How many people in the world can believe that the vermilion bird wakes up and gets angry? If he really is one of those legendary predecessors, why did he come to Chang'an City to kill people? Why did he take the risk of provoking the vermilion bird's anger? Why didn't he show any signs? Monk Huang Yang smiled and said, again, the divine objects left by the previous sages have their own meanings in their movements. How can we ordinary people understand them? If the predecessor who may have come to Chang'an City has really surpassed the knowing destiny state and has the ability of Tianqi or the limitless thought, then his purpose is not something we can guess. Sages, divine objects, Tianqi, limitless, these words echoed in the cramped space at the top of the Wanyan Tower. Even the master of Tang Empire and the exquisite Buddha could not help but fall into a long silence in the face of these extraordinary existences. The 13th year of Tianqi is really not peaceful. Li Qingshan sighed softly and turned to look at the sky outside the glass window, which was confined to the size of several palms, the floating clouds in the sky, and the noisy birds on the clouds. He said leisurely, "Nothing serious, but there are always some small things that make people uneasy. I am thinking whether I should make a divination or not." Buddhist disciples practice Zen, not life. Monk Huangyang looked at his back and said calmly, "I have never believed in the Han divination. Please don't forget how much trouble the imperial astronomer caused when he observed the stars. Now it seems that the judgment of the night covers the stars and the country will be restless is really absurd." Li Qingshan gazed at the clouds behind his back and said indifferently, "The clouds have a mind, and the stars have a mind. Any deduction of fate that seems absurd and nonsensical right now will be discovered in the end when fate reaches the next juncture. It's not that the deduction is absurd and nonsensical, but that fate has always been very easy to become absurd and nonsensical. Even if what you said is right, don't forget the comments made by the divine priest from West Hill when he taught you Taoism. Even if you have the ability to see the sky, you have to pay for it with your life. When the imperial astronomer's stargazing caused countless disturbances, the empress begged you to do a divination in order to cleanse herself, but you refused. Are you going to shorten your lifespan today because of a slight emotion in your heart and an inexplicable feeling? The mysteries of heaven are unpredictable. I, Li Qingshan, still want to see the prosperity of the Tang Empire for a few more years. How can I shorten my life painstakingly?" Li Qingshan slowly frowned and looked at the bustling peddlers under the tower and outside the temple shouting against the heat. He said, "But even at the risk of being seriously ill, I also want to see what kind of variable has fallen on this chessboard." Monk Huangyang sighed softly in his heart and no longer tried to stop him. He moved away the Buddhist scriptures, brush and ink on the table, took out the black and white chess pieces and a chessboard from the box, and put them on the desk. Li Qingshan turned around and walked to the desk. He did not make any complicated and mysterious movements, but just flicked his sleeves, grabbed two black and white chess pieces, and threw them on the chessboard casually. Dozens of matte chess pieces hit, rolled and rotated on the wooden chessboard, making a crisp sound. After a long time, they gradually calmed down. Following the will of fate, they silently fell in their positions and did not move anymore. Li Qingshan and Monk Huangyang's eyes fell on a black chess piece on the chessboard at the same time. This chess piece did not move in a straight line, nor did it control the Tianyuan, nor was it confined to a square. It just fell in a slanted position, randomly and weirdly. The vertical and horizontal lines on the chessboard were like the narrow roads in the human world. The chess pieces were like the carriages of travelers, stopping at the crossroads and asking each other questions. They were either friends or enemies, or they would not meet again after drinking 2 cups of tea. It was peaceful as usual, and the disputes were as usual. Only one carriage stood in the middle of a broad road, neither moving forward nor backward, neither exchanging greetings with the travelers on the side of the road, nor trying to break through everything. It just stood there in silence, blocking the road. It was this block that suddenly made the crisscrossing and intersecting narrow road strange. People going south could not go south, and people going west could not go west. Enemies who wanted to draw their swords and fight each other could not see each other through it. Lovers who wanted to love each other could not hug each other through it. The peace became stiff, and the disputes became chaotic. Is this the variable on the chessboard? Looking at the black chess piece and the silent carriage in the crisscrossing narrow roads, Li Qingshan, the nation master of Tang, still looked calm, but his face turned pale at a speed visible to the naked eye, as if he was suffering from a serious illness at this moment. There was a dead silence at the top of Wanyan Tower. No one knew how long the silence lasted, but it was finally broken by Li Qingshan's hoarse and tired voice. His voice was empty, without any emotion of sadness or joy. "This variable is going to die." Monk Huang Yang heard this and was slightly stunned. Looking at the black chess piece, he slowly put his palms together and showed mercy. At this moment, Li Qingshan raised his eyebrows and a strange color flashed in his eyes. He said, "No, there is another variable." The night came, but the heat had not subsided. The cicadas were still singing outside the window. It was quiet on the second floor of the old library of the academy. No one knew when the delicate female professor by the east window had left. Under the west window, the seriously injured teenager was still sitting against the wall. His face was pale and his eyes were closed, as if he would fall into an eternal dark sweet dream in the next moment. Not far away, there was a row of bookshelves against the wall. The complex decorations on the side of the bookshelves shone slightly and then slid away silently. A moment later, a fat teenager in the summer robe of the academy squeezed in, panting. Just as he was about to squat down with difficulty and pull out the book Wu Zhanyang's Theory on Haran's sword from under the bookshelf, the fat teenager suddenly frowned. A trace of suspicion appeared on Akiji's white and tender face. He turned around and looked. Looking at the teenager who was motionless against the wall not far away as if he was asleep, his knitted eyebrows gradually relaxed. He smacked his thick lips and sighed, "When did the academy have a guy who is more desperate than Ning Ke? Finally, it's earlier than 2 days ago. I'll try to finish the second chapter before 2 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for it and vote monthly. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 115. Ning Ke did not believe that he would die because of the law of cause and effect that he firmly believed in. However, he was seriously injured today and the invisible spear pierced through his chest was beyond his cognition. Therefore, on the 16th year since he came to this world, he finally began to seriously consider the issue of death. He woke up and tried to open his eyes immediately. He raised his head and looked around with the last of his strength, trying to see if he had come to the underworld and if the underworld really existed in this world. A very white and round face appeared in the air very close to him. The eyes on the round face were narrowed into 2 small dots, which were staring at him with puzzled and curious eyes. Because this big face was round, white, smooth, and tender, it looked like the moon in his hometown that he had not seen for a long time. Therefore, Ning Ke, who had been attacked by his injuries and lost his mind, did not feel afraid. Instead, he felt very close to it. He leaned against the wall and slightly tilted his head to look at the big round face near him. He smiled weakly and said, "The Yiksha in the underworld should be very dark, so I should not be dead yet." "Then, who are you?" The big round face near him did not scare Chinpipi, but he suddenly opened his eyes and startled Chinpipi. Chinpipi widened his eyes and stared at the pale face of the man. He said, "I want to know who you are." Ning Ke raised his trembling right hand to cover his seemingly normal but actually painful and empty chest. He frowned and looked to the side to make sure that he was still on the second floor of the old library. It was already dark outside the window, and the female professor by the window had left. He could not help but feel surprised and cold. Why did the female professor turn a blind eye to him? Now, except for himself, basically no student of the academy would go to the second floor of the old library, not to mention that it was late at night. Thinking of the handwriting that was obviously left at night, he was stunned and looked at the fat lad in the summer robe in front of him. He asked in a hoarse voice, "Chinpipi?" Chinpipi's eyes widened. Of course, no matter how big it became, it was just the process of changing from a mung bean to a green bean and then to a soybean. He stared at Ning Ke and said incredulously, you are Ning Ke. That's right. Ning Ke stared at his round face, and a flame of intense shock suddenly appeared in his eyes. He said in a hoarse voice, if you don't want to see me die, think of a way to save me. Chen Pippi didn't ask why he had to save her. These days, the two of them had been exchanging letters. Although they hadn't met face to face, they already knew each other's temperament. What's more, the idiots scolded each other, mocked and ridiculed each other. After helping each other so many times, how could they just watch each other die without helping each other? Putting two fingers on Ning Ke's wrist, Chen Pippi was silent for a moment. Suddenly, he raised his eyebrows and stared at Ning Ke's eyes in disbelief. He said, how come you're still alive after such a serious injury? Not dying doesn't mean I won't die. I'm about to die. How much more nonsense do you want to spout, you idiot? You idiot, why didn't you get treated in Chang'an when you were so badly injured? Why did you come to the academy and dawdle? Don't tell me you came all the way here just to treat my injuries. Why not? Didn't you say you were a genius? What does genius have to do with medical skills? The first question you gave me was a prescription. Prescriptions can't cure people. You should be dead now. No matter how exquisite the prescription is, it can't cure you. Ning Ke's spirit was extremely weak. Looking at the guy in front of him, he said, I've been lying here for a whole day, but no one in the academy cared about me. Even the gentle and pleasant female professor left me here so heartlessly. You can't leave me alone. Chen Pippi looked down and saw the bowl of water and two steamed buns beside Ning Quebec. He said, Senior sister is quiet and peaceful. She lives in the cottage at the back of the mountain and is always quiet. She didn't leave you alone, you don't have to explain anything. The academy must reject indifference and warm you and me. Ning Ke tiredly raised his head and looked at Chen Pippi under the dim starlight. After a moment of silence, he smiled self-mockingly and said, Anyway, my life is in your hands. After saying this, his eyes slightly drooped and his shoulders loosened. He quickly fell into a coma again. Chen Pippi opened his mouth wide and looked at the guy in a coma in the corner, his face full of disbelief. What is this? You fainted without saying your last words. Are you bullying me because I have to save you? You're acting shamelessly. How can you do things like this? He muttered angrily and squatted down with difficulty. Finally, he simply sat on the floor and stretched out his right hand. His 5 fat fingers tapped on Ning Ke's chest dozens of times like lightning. When he checked Ning Ke's pulse, he knew that Ning Ke was seriously injured, and the injury was between the ocean of qi and mountain of snow in his chest. For an ordinary person or even an ordinary cultivator, this kind of injury was indeed fatal. But as Ning Ke hoped, as a peerless genius cultivated by both the West Hill and the Academy, Chen Pippi was really a peerless genius even though he did not look like one. The most important temperament of a genius was self-confidence. As for the pride extended from self-confidence, it was another matter. Chen Pippi's self-confidence was all round. Since Ning Ke was not dead at this time, he firmly believed that Ning Ke would be fine as long as he took action. Is the fatal injury in the ocean of qi and mountain of snow so terrible? I, a genius, can easily use the natural stream magical finger and the Academy's no-boundary spirit to gather the pure qi of heaven and earth. I only need a few seconds to lift you up. Chen Pippi suddenly let out a strange cry and withdrew his fingers as if touching charcoal. His eyes fell on Ning Ke's chest which did not show any abnormality. He frowned as if his eyebrows were about to be folded into several sections, and his expression became unprecedentedly serious. It's so weird, so weird, so weird, how could it be possible? His thick lips slightly moved. Chen Pippi stared at Ning Ke's chest and kept murmuring to himself. No one knew what he had found, but his voice became more and more trembling and less confident. There is a sharp sword style entering your body through the wood and breaking your internal organs and flesh. It should be a cultivator who hurt you. But that cultivator is at most in the see-through state. How could the sword style staying in your flesh resist my natural stream finger? Why doesn't the gentleman's no-boundary spirit that teacher taught me work at all? This sword style is indeed sharp, and it is the cultivator's desperate strike before his death. Ning Ke, you poor guy who can't cultivate, actually forced a sword master to this point. You are really proud. But, if I can't cure you, how can I be proud in front of you in the future? No. Where does the cold aura around your chest and abdomen come from? How can it touch my Taoist heart? No. How can there be such a scorching aura? Where does this destructive aura come from? Chen Pipi was shocked and fell on the floor. He looked at Ning Ke who was leaning against the wall and unconscious. He thought to himself, what on earth happened to you? How could there be such a strange and terrible phenomenon in your body? He gradually hid the shock on his face and put his hands on his knees. He slowly closed his eyes and began to think about what he had detected before. Occasionally, he raised his round hands and gently drew some unknown emblematic gestures in the air in front of him. He carefully continued to investigate the movement in Ning Ke's body. After a long time, Chen Pipi opened his eyes and looked at Ning Quebec. The emotions in his eyes had long been unable to calm down, only endless puzzlement and confusion. According to his judgment, there should be a copious and irresistible scorching power that directly entered Ning Ke's body through the channel that cultivator used his sword style to break in Ning Ke's chest, and instantly destroyed the stupid snow mountain that was blocked by all acupoints. Logically speaking, when the snow mountain under the ocean of Qi was directly destroyed, Ning Ke should have died immediately. But somehow, there was an absolutely cold aura that entered this guy's body, and when the snow mountain collapsed and melted, another snow mountain was formed. It had to be admitted that in the cultivation world, Chen Pipi was indeed a peerless genius that only appeared in 100 years. He did not witness the battle in the lakeside house, did not see the raised top wing on the Vermilion Bird Avenue, did not see the invisible spear thrown from the sky, and did not see the big black umbrella gently swaying like a lotus. He also did not use divination like the nation master Li Qingshan did. He only deduced the situation at that time through Ning Ke's internal injuries. However, knowing how Ning Ke's internal injuries were formed did not mean that he could cure them. After the snow mountain in his body was destroyed, he did not die on the spot, and in the blink of an eye, a new snow mountain was formed. What a mysterious and profound method. I'm afraid the great god's vanquished skill in the Taoist temple is no better than this. Haotian's brilliance enlightens mortals' apertures, which is probably the way of destruction and rebirth. Chen Pipi stared at the unconscious Ning Ke absent-mindedly, and murmured in a trembling voice, but I didn't feel a trace of Haotian's divine light in this guy's body, and how could those great divine priests of West Hill come to Chang'an? Even if they suddenly became idiots, how could they exhaust half of their lifetime cultivation to enlighten you? If it was not the great god's vanquished skill, then who did something in your body? Was it someone from Xiankong Temple? No, those bald monks only know how to chant and preach Zen, but they don't have this kind of earthly method. Those stupid guys from Devil's Doctrine can't do it, and the master in the Taoist temple can't do it either. Such a wonderful method. I don't know if the headmaster of academy can do it, but the master is traveling with eldest brother in other countries, and there is no reason for him to come back at this time. What the hell is going on? Chen Pipi was puzzled, and scratched his head in pain. His black hair kept passing between his fat fingers, like a tired old bull painfully plowing the black soil of Yen Kingdom. Chen Pipi was very clear that the destruction and reconstruction of the snow mountain in Ning Ke's body seemed to be a great lucky chance, but without the protection of Haotian's divine light, this extremely violent destruction and rebirth was basically equal to death. The snow mountain in Ning Ke's chest and abdomen was extremely unstable, and could collapse at any time, and the aura there was so weak that it was close to nothingness. If this guy wanted to survive, someone had to inject vitality into him with a very mysterious method. The primordial chi between heaven and earth was balanced, so how could he find vitality in the nothingness of the night? Unless he could find the exotic flowers and fruits on the foreign islands that had been nourished by the primordial chi for tens of thousands of years, there was only a glimmer of hope for the dying Ning Quebec. But where could he find those exotic flowers and fruits nourished by the primordial chi of heaven and earth? Not in the academy, not in Chang'an, not in the whole Tang Empire, not even Chen Pipi. Chen Pipi looked at the unconscious Ning Ke for a long time, and then lowered his head to take out a crystal-clear porcelain bottle made of unknown materials. His face showed a painful and hesitant expression, and his arm holding the small porcelain bottle began to tremble, as if the small porcelain bottle was as heavy as a peach mountain and could not bear it. Chapter 3, Try to finish before 4:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 116. People looked up at the high sky and praised Haotian's kindness. No matter how diligent they were in cultivation, no matter how perceptive they were, they never dared to dream of flying into the sky. Because they knew that no matter how difficult the road was, it was not as difficult as reaching the sky. The road from the mortal world to the sky was always full of difficulties and obstacles, and no one had ever succeeded. Haotian Divine Hall was in West Hill, and claimed to be the only sect of light that could understand the will of Haotian. But no one had ever heard of a great divine priest who could become a part of Haotian's brilliance. There was a kind of elixir in West Hill called the Heavenly Power Pill. Just from the name, one could tell how precious this kind of elixir was. It was hidden in an unknown place and was extremely rare. At this time, there were 2 heavenly power pills in the porcelain bottle in Chen Pipi's trembling hand. They say that I'm a cultivation genius in 100 years, and I was given 3 heavenly power pills after I joined the sect. As a result, the old Taoists deep in the temple held a meeting for 3 days. You know, senior brother Yi only ate 1 back then. I ate 1 and kept 1 to save my life. I wanted to save the last one for senior brother in the future, but I just gave it to you. Although the heavenly power pill can't help people reach the heavenly power realm, it can increase one's lifespan by at least 10 years if it is given to an ordinary person. If it is given to a cultivator, they may be able to cross the heavenly power realm directly. If the pill is given to the monarch of the Great River Kingdom, it can definitely be exchanged for 30,000 docile virgins. It's not difficult for him to give up the throne to me. If I give this pill to Tangham of the Devil's Doctrine, he may be willing to betray his sect and join West Hill. Such a precious heavenly power pill is given to a poor guy like you to treat his injury. Chen Pipi wouldn't care if it was an ordinary treasure, or even if he had to use his psyche power to save the dying Ning Quebec. But the 2 pills in the bottle were too important. They were the most precious elixirs of Haotian Taoism in West Hill. If they were spread to the world, it would cause a lot of turmoil, so he was very hesitant. After a long time, the fat lad sighed bitterly and looked at the unconscious Ning Quebec. He said weakly, "Those monks always say that saving a life is more important than building a 7-story stone tower. Although I don't know what's so important about those ugly stone towers, I think it makes sense. Although I still think your life is not as important as this pill, the heavenly power pill can't speak, and you have entrusted your life to me shamelessly before you passed out, you?" The so-called reason was actually just an excuse to convince himself. Chen Pipi showed a sorrowful expression. He unscrewed the cap of the sparkling and translucent porcelain bottle and carefully poured a pill into his palm. Then he sent it to Ning Ke's mouth. The color of the pill was like rice dumpling, without any luster or smell. It didn't attract the singing of hundreds of birds in the night sky. It just gave off a faint herbal smell and seemed very ordinary. If you had died earlier, this heavenly power pill could have been saved. If you hadn't come to the academy, this heavenly power pill could have been saved. If you hadn't left your message on the paper when you had no way to cultivate, I wouldn't have known you. Then this heavenly power pill could have been saved. Chen Pipi stuffed the pill into Ning Kei's mouth, picked up the bowl of water beside him and poured it into Ning Kei's mouth. He pressed his palm on Ning Kei's chest to help him dissolve the pill. He murmured and complained, his face full of sorrow and regret. "You're so smart, so persistent, and so smart. But your acupoints in the ocean of qi and mountain of snow are blocked. You're so pitiful. It's not an exaggeration to say that you're a lad cursed by Haotian." Ning Kei's eyes were still tightly closed, but his pale cheeks quickly became rosy. Chen Pipi stared at him and lamented, "Now that your snow mountain has been destroyed and rebuilt, you might be able to unblock some of your acupoints. But you got a serious injury that can't be cured without the heavenly power pill, and you met me, the only person in the world who has the heavenly power pill. But I couldn't bear to see you die. So you are actually a young man who is favored by Haotian." The melted and collapsed snow mountain was instantly rebuilt by the cold power. It seemed magical, but the structure of the snow mountain was extremely unstable and could collapse again at any time. The dangerous glaciers inside were full of holes. Most of the holes could not connect the front and back, but made the snow mountain as fragile as a wooden pillar that had been eaten by termites. The precious heavenly power pill was melted by the water and slowly penetrated down through Ning Kei's throat. Before it reached his stomach, it turned into a faint medicinal power and dissipated among his internal organs like a faint starry divine light. Under the illumination of the divine light, the snow mountain in the distance did not collapse again. A corner rose abruptly and stood quietly under the firmament, as noble as a saintess and as firm as a warrior. It slowly melted and moistened the dry wilderness under its feet. A breath of life pervaded that strange space. This breath did not come from the sun above the firmament, but from the origin of the world. Day and night alternated, and the trickling ice stream flowed slowly. Gradually, a second blade of grass grew by the stream and then spread into a grassland. There were herds of gazelles jumping happily among the grass, and voles chewing the grass roots happily under the ground. Several green trees grew in the depths of the grassland, which made people very happy. The heavenly power pill dissipated very slowly, but was absorbed very quickly by the human body. When the last trace of medicinal power melted into Ning Kei's ocean of qi and mountain of snow, he woke up. At this time, the morning light had risen outside the old library. He leaned against the wall tiredly, squinting at the morning light coming in from the east window. His dry lips moved slightly, and he murmured so softly that it was almost inaudible, "Everything has its cause and effect. Master Haotian, you naturally have your reasons for bringing me to this world. I knew you wouldn't just watch me die. It's not Master Haotian. It's me, the genius, who can't watch you die." Chen Pipi leaned against the wall beside him and rubbed his dry eyes. He muttered, "You're all guys who have one foot in the underworld. When you wake up, you don't even know who you should thank." Ning Kei smiled tiredly and looked at his big round face quietly. He really didn't expect that Chen Pipi, who had left a message for a long time, would look like this. He asked, "How did you cure this injury?" Chen Pipi moved his fat body, rubbed his back against the wall, and stood up with difficulty. Then he put his hands on his waist and moved his sore body. He smiled contemptuously and waved his hand, saying, "How many times have I said that I'm a rare genius in the world? If you were treated by ordinary doctors, you would definitely lie in a coffin. But for me, it's just a small matter of waving my sleeves." The fat lad had always thought that he was a peerless genius in 100 years. Therefore, he had been demanding himself with the demeanor of a genius since he was a child. He envied the demeanor of his senior brothers, who were most particular about being calm. Last night, in order to cure Ning Kei, he had given him a rare and precious pill. But since he had given it, it would be a bit like showing kindness to others if he kept emphasizing it, which was seriously not in line with his aesthetic taste. Therefore, he didn't explain the details and just waved his sleeves, showing that he didn't care. Of course, if someone stood in front of him at this moment, he would definitely see that the fat on his round face was slightly twitching because of the pain and regret in his heart. In the morning light, the pained Chenpipi turned around with a calm expression. He looked at Ning Kei's eyes and suddenly made a request, "Can I see the big black umbrella beside you?" Ning Kei was startled. After a moment of silence, he looked up at the lad and said, "I don't have the strength. You take it yourself." So it was Chenpipi's turn to be startled. He frowned and looked at Ning Kei for a long time. After a long silence, he struggled to get down and held the handle of the big black umbrella. It was a little cold in his hand. The handle of the umbrella should be made of some common wood in the northern part of the empire. The black umbrella looked a little greasy, but nothing else could be seen. Chenpipi looked at the big black umbrella in his hand for a long time and didn't see anything wrong. After a moment of silence, he put the umbrella back to Ning Kei and said, "Last night, I took the time to inquire about something." "What?" Ning Kei asked tiredly. "The vermilion bird woke up yesterday." Chenpipi stared at his eyes. Ning Kei frowned slightly and thought of how he felt when he was seriously injured and unconscious on the long street. He thought of the palpitation he felt when he and Sang Sang walked through the Vermilion Bird Avenue with the big black umbrella a few months ago. But he really didn't know that the vermilion bird in the distance had been awakened at that time, so he just shook his head. Chenpipi didn't see anything wrong. After a short pause, he continued, "Yesterday, a sword master died in Chang'an." Ning Kei was silent. Chenpipi looked at him with a faint smile and said, "There are many sword wounds on your body. Although they have stopped bleeding, they are not old wounds because of the fire." Ning Kei smiled and looked up to ask, "What on earth do you want to say? You were seriously injured, but you didn't go home to lie down. Instead, you came to the academy in a horse carriage. It can only mean that you were injured in the morning. At that time, the Chang'an local government was searching for you. You couldn't go home, so you had to come to the academy to hide. The Chang'an local government wouldn't stop the academy's horse carriage, let alone search for you in the academy. Yesterday morning, the sword master died and the vermilion bird on the long street woke up. You were injured so many times, but there was no blood on your body. All the wounds were burned by the invisible fire. That can only mean one thing." Chenpipi looked at him and said with a frown, "The person who killed that swordsman was you, and the person who caused the vermilion bird to be so infuriated is also you. But what I still cannot understand is that the person who did all these things, is just an ordinary person. I admire you. If your surname can be Fu, then my surname can be Hua." Ning Kei leaned against the wall tiredly and said, "The problem is that since you saved me after so much trouble, I believe you won't give me to the government. So why do you ask me these questions?" Chenpipi raised his eyebrows and said proudly, "Because I, the genius, want to prove to you that nothing can be hidden from me." Ning Kei looked at him with a smile and suddenly said, "There is no big family in West Hill that has influence all over the secular world as you said in your message. There is only one place that is afraid of the academy, and that is Haotian Divine Hall. You are not the heir of a family, but the heir chosen by Haotian Taoism. I don't know if your master was the hierarch of Haotian Taoism or which great divine priest. But I still can't understand why the Haotian Divine Hall of West Hill, the heir chosen by the academy, and the peerless genius who has been accepted by the academy, is so fat. Finish the fight. Sleep. I have to get up early tomorrow. The washstand in the house was completely cracked. It's leaking. I need to find someone to fix it. I'm as angry as Chenpipi. My pride is hurt. Because I bought it. It's just over the warranty period. And it's very expensive. I don't understand why it's like this. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 117. Hearing this analysis, Chen Pipi was shocked at first, and then became angry. He felt hurt and stared at Ning Ke with a gloomy face. He did not admit anything, but lowered his voice and scolded coldly, "Don't talk nonsense, or don't blame me for killing you. You are just a small potato, don't show off your little cleverness." The fat genius boy looked serious, and he really looked like he was looking down on the world. However, Ning Ke was not afraid at all. He leaned against the wall and looked at him with a smile. He suddenly asked, "Have you ever killed anyone?" Chen Pipi opened his mouth slightly and wanted to answer arrogantly, but he could not say anything. He could only lower his head and look at his toes. Ning Ke looked at him with interest and continued to ask, "Have you always killed people?" Chen Pipi lowered his head and put his hands behind his back. His fingertips touched them with difficulty. He tightly pursed his lips and refused to answer the question. He twisted his fat body from left to right, like a dead child who had been wronged and hurt his self-esteem. Ning Ke laughed and looked at him. He sighed and said, "You must have accidentally stepped on a few ants on the road. Your white and tender hands haven't even touched a drop of blood. Then don't learn from others and use things like life and death to threaten others. It's not powerful and will only make people laugh. I have to remind you, don't tell others about me." After hearing this lesson, Chen Pipi covered his face with his sleeves and walked away in shame. It was still early in the morning and he could still go to the study room to listen to the class. However, he had just struggled back from the underworld of death and was extremely tired and weak physically and mentally. Ning Ke would not pretend to be an obedient good student. Moreover, in his vague memory yesterday, he vaguely remembered that the female professor promised to ask for leave for him, so he decided to go back to his home at Lin 47th Street to rest. Using the big black umbrella as a walking stick, the seriously injured lad slowly walked out of the old library. He slightly bent his body like an old man doing morning exercises and strolled along the edge of the wetland against the morning light. He passed through the quiet side alley and walked to the front gate of the academy. Outside the simple stone gate of the academy was a large piece of beautiful green meadow like a carpet. Hidden in the middle of the meadow were more than a dozen stone-paved lanes. Many flowering trees were planted at the edge of the lanes and in the depths of the meadow. As it was midsummer, the flowers on the trees had long been replaced by lush and tender branches and young fruits. There was a carriage at the end of the green meadow path. The carriage had been waiting there for a long time and the horses were tired and lowered their heads. Squatting beside the carriage was a little girl in a maid's uniform. She had not slept for a day and a night, and her tanned face was slightly pale due to exhaustion, worry, and fear, as if she had been smeared with Chenjinji Cosmetic Store's powder. Yesterday morning, Ning Ke didn't come back from killing people, and the government runners were inquiring everywhere with serious expressions. Listening to the hurried hooves of the Yulin royal guards on the long street, Sang Sang knew that something was wrong. She forcibly suppressed her uneasiness and waited silently in the old brush pen shop. But when the carriage came back, Ning Ke still didn't come back, and she finally couldn't wait anymore. After asking the coachman and confirming that Ning Ke had gone to the academy in the morning, Sang Sang thought for a while and directly took out 10 taels of silver to ask the coachman to take her to the academy. Then she squatted beside the green tree on the meadow beside the carriage and waited silently. She took out 10 taels of silver and asked the driver to take her to the academy. She did not know if Ning Ke was hurt. She did not dare to ask the instructors and students in the academy. She could only wait. She squatted beside the green meadow and watched the stone gate of the academy being shrouded in darkness and awakened by the morning sun. She watched the lights in the study room being lit and extinguished. She listened to the students reading aloud. She watched the ants in front of the old shoes come and go. She watched people walking into and out of the academy, but she did not see that guy. The students of the academy came in carriages. They were curious when they saw Ning Ke's little handmaiden squatting beside the road. Some of them asked her, but she ignored them. She stubbornly kept her mouth shut and looked at the gate of the academy. After a whole night, which seemed like a lifetime, Sang Sang finally saw that figure. She rubbed her sore eyes, and her pale face gradually relaxed. She closed her eyes, cupped her hands in front of her chest, and muttered a few words. She quickly stood up with her hands on her knees. Because she had been squatting for too long, the blood and qi in her thin legs were a little blocked. Her thin body swayed, and she almost fell. Holding the big black umbrella, Ning Ke slowly walked to her. Looking at the familiar little black face and the tiredness and worry on it, he felt a surge of pity in his heart. Although they had gone through many life and death situations together in this life, it was still the happiest thing to see each other again. He naturally opened his arms and wanted to hold Sang Sang in his arms. But he suddenly found that the little handmaiden was a little taller than when she was in the city of Wei. She was already up to his chest. He was startled subconsciously and did not continue to hold her in his arms. Instead, he reached out his hand and rubbed her head with a smile. Sang Sang raised her little face and giggled. The two turned around and supported each other to walk to the carriage. They had a tacit understanding and did not say a word at the gate of the academy. The coachman yawned. Last night, he had to make do with sleeping in the carriage, and his body was extremely tired. However, with 10 taels of silver in his hands, his exhaustion was not an issue. His right hand lightly waved the horsewhip in the air, making a light cracking sound. His left hand lightly lifted the reins, and with the sound of hooves on the ground, the carriage slowly began to move. In the carriage, Ning Ke said in a hoarse voice, "I'm very tired. Let's talk about it when we get home. The pedao is below. Remember to take it with you later." The carriage arrived at Lin 47th Street. Ning Ke, who was exhausted and seriously injured, seemed to have fallen into a deep sleep and did not open his eyes. Sang Sang took out the pedao and stuffed it into the big black umbrella. Then she tied it to her back and, with the help of the coachman, dragged him into the old brush pen shop like a sack of grain and stuffed him into a thin quilt. In the hot summer, no matter how thin the quilt was, it was still a quilt. Ning Ke's face was flushed and he was sweating profusely. He did not know how long he had slept, but he finally woke up. He opened his eyes and confirmed that he was home. He took a deep breath and the lingering fear hidden in the depths of his heart finally spread out, making his hands and feet feel a little cold. He stared at the transparent glazed tiles on the roof. After a long silence, he suddenly said, "Recently, I have mentioned to you about the academy student named Chen Pipi. Remember that I owe this guy my life. At the right time and the right place, remind me to find a way to return it to him." At this time, Sang Sang was pouring boiling water into a bucket and preparing to wipe his body. She did not expect that he would wake up. She was startled and sat beside him, puzzled. She asked, "Return it to him? Although I don't know how he did it, my life should be saved by him. I have told you many times that there is nothing more important than our lives in this world. In this case, it is reasonable to repay him at any cost in the future." Then he looked at Sang Sang's thoughtful face and reminded her with a smile, "But you can't use our lives to repay him." "Young master, what happened?" Sang Sang stared at his still pale cheeks and asked softly and seriously. "The tea artisan is a cultivator. I was seriously injured and finally I only remember fainting on a street. As for what happened later, I am not very clear." Ning Ke thought of the wonderful encounters he had since yesterday morning, especially the vague feelings he had when he was in a coma. A trace of confusion flashed through his eyes. He frowned and repeated, "I really don't know what happened. Make something to eat. I am a little hungry." He did not like this kind of situation where there were changes happening to him without him knowing anything. After frowning and thinking, he did not want to discuss this matter anymore. Suddenly, he thought of a problem. He looked at Sang Sang with a pleading look and said, "No fried egg noodles, no fat intestine noodles, and no hot and sour noodle soup left yesterday. It must be rancid in such hot weather. For the sake of my serious injury and almost dying, let's pay for a good meal tonight. Song Song's nose turned sour when she heard his words. She thought to herself, I'm just a little maid. How could I dare to mistreat you every day? I'm just thinking that you're going to marry young mistress in the future, so I have to save some money for you. I gave the cart driver 10 taels of silver. She lowered her head and said softly, Young master, when you were in a coma, I went to the antique shop next door and asked for a bowl of pickled radish. I poured it into the pot and stewed it with the duck. It will be ready soon. After saying this, Sang Sang picked up the hot towel from the bucket and wrung it. Then she put it in a place where Ning Kei could reach and walked out of the room. She wiped her slightly red hands on her apron. Sang Sang gave the cart driver 10 taels of silver. She wanted to tell the young master that although she was young and thrifty, she was not a little handmaiden who did not know what was important and what was not. When it was time to spend money, she would not be reluctant. Ning Kei lay on the bed and looked at the busy little body outside the window. He thought of the hidden annoyance in her previous words and could not help laughing. However, he did not expect that when Sang Sang saw him supporting himself on the bed, she quickly walked to the window and told him to have a good rest. Then she closed the window tightly. The light in the room suddenly became very dim. In addition to the glimmer from the glazed tiles above the head, there was only a warm candle on the table which Sang Sang had lit in advance, quietly accompanying him on the bed. Ning Kei quietly looked at the candle on the table, and the smile on his face gradually disappeared. Yen Suqing, the tea artist, was a cultivator. This hidden factor seriously destroyed his plan. If he was not lucky enough, he might have died in the small lakeside house. It was impossible for him to escape to that street, and there was no chance for him to hide in the academy for a night and meet Chin Pippi, the little wizard of West Hill. When he was in a coma on the street, he knew that something must have happened. Otherwise, he could not explain why the wounds on his body healed, nor could he explain the pain caused by the invisible spear in his chest. But he really did not know what happened at that time and what Chin Pippi had done to him. His thoughts were stagnant, his body was injured, and his spirit was damaged. He was sweating all over in the hot summer. He felt that his skin was sticky and a little annoyed. He wanted to wipe it, but his hand froze when it was about to touch the wet towel. Because he suddenly found that there seemed to be a shallow layer of obstruction between his fingers and the wet towel. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 118. There was a boolsh asterisk t truth in the world, if there was, and if there wasn't, there wasn't. In the secular world, the standard of whether there was or not was very simple. If there was something that could be seen like a mountain, then there was something that could be heard like a sound, and there was something that could be touched like a fire. But if you couldn't see, hear, or touch it, then there was naturally no such thing. This standard was not applicable to the world of cultivation. The breath or primordial chi that permeated between heaven and earth, and the psyche power that caused the primordial chi to vibrate through the ocean of chi and mountain of snow could not be perceived by ordinary people. They couldn't see, hear, or touch the breath of heaven and earth and the cultivator's psyche power, but it didn't mean that such things didn't exist. The initial state, also known as the initial awareness state, meant that the cultivator's psyche could be released from the ocean of chi and mountain of snow and understand the existence of the breath of heaven and earth. The perception state meant that after the cultivator knew the breath of heaven and earth, he could get along with it in harmony and even communicate with it. These two initial states were collectively known as the emptiness state. Whether an ordinary person could embark on the road of cultivation could be judged by the above discussion. If he could see, hear, or touch the breath of heaven and earth or psyche, then he was really on the road. Ning Kei stared at his slightly trembling fingers, the thin gap between his fingers and the wet towel, and the steaming hot air. He knew that what he felt was not the hot air, but something else. It was not accurate to describe this feeling as touching. It was more like perception. There was spirit in the human brain, and the spirit produced psyche. The psyche was thinking, and the psyche power was thinking very, 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 very much to be with you. It was a kind of mysterious power that was similar to this, which was the power of thinking. At this time, Ning Ke had not recovered from his serious injury, and he was exhausted. His mind was clear without any distracting thoughts except for one. He wanted to pick up the steaming wet towel and wipe his body. It seemed that the aura circulating between heaven and earth finally understood his thoughts and felt the power of his thoughts. From the eaves, from the cracks in the window, from the quilt, from every drop of sweat, they gathered in front of his fingers at a speed that exceeded the scope of speed and fell on the hot wet towel. There was a dead silence in the room. Ning Ke looked at his fingers like the famous infatuated girl of the Yueluan kingdom, not daring to breathe or blink. He used all his strength to ensure that his trembling fingers did not turn into shadows. He maintained this posture with unprecedented caution, like a frozen quail. After a long time, he raised his eyebrows extremely slowly and tilted his head slightly as if in slow motion. He looked at his fingertips in bewilderment and uneasiness. Then, he slowly closed his eyes, forcibly suppressing the excitement in his heart, and began to meditate. Many years ago, Ning Ke had obtained the article on the response of the Tao in Kaiping Market. Since then, he had been meditating all the time. He meditated before going to bed, meditated while staring at the morning sun after waking up, meditated while staring blankly at the morning sun after winning 3 bowls of rice wine in a bet, and meditated after jumping into Shubi Lake while bathed in blood. Even though he had never felt the primordial chi flowing between heaven and earth, his proficiency in entering the state of meditation was definitely the best in the world. All thoughts were gone. Firmly guard your heart. Follow your will. It had been 16 years since he came to this world. His acupoints in the ocean of chi and mountain of snow were blocked, and his hopes had been destroyed countless times. Finally, for the first time, he heard or felt the long and calm breathing sound. It was the breathing of heaven and earth. He dared to swear on the reputation of his mother, who loved him the most in the general's mansion, that this long and calm breathing sound was absolutely the most beautiful sound he had ever heard, even more beautiful than the sound of the horse gang of Shubi Lake falling off their mounts, more beautiful than the sound of Zhang Yiqi struggling with his eyes wide open, and even more beautiful than the sound of the silver in the money bag knocking against each other. Between the long and calm breaths, there were green leaves unfolding, beautiful flowers blooming, hundreds of birds chirping, towering mountains, vast streams of water, oranges falling at the end of a province, hundreds of ships racing to cross, the vastness of the earth, the tranquility of the sky. Ning Ke did not know how to describe the beauty of the breathing of heaven and earth. After thinking about it, he could only compare it with the faint breathing sound he had heard years ago. That year, when he found little Sang Sang, who was frozen blue and blue all over, he took off his clothes and held the little baby girl in his arms for a whole day and night, and finally heard the faint breathing sound. At this moment, he finally vaguely remembered the sounds he had heard when he was unconscious on the long street, and understood the meaning of those sounds. Those were the breathing sounds from the stone posts by the street to tie the horses, the doors of the wine shop. Those were the breathing sounds from the ancient pagoda tree in the deep courtyard, the green leaves under the seat, the breathing sounds from the stone lions, the wooden buildings, the streets, the imperial palace, and the city walls. They were all the breaths given by heaven and earth. What he heard was the long and calm breathing that came from the ancient times and was destined to go to the future. His fingers touched something that was not real but could confirm its existence. The doors and windows of the room were tightly shut, but there was a gentle wave like the wind slowly surrounding his body. No, this wave was more dignified than the wind, more like the gentle water in a still pond, but more agile than water. Finally, he was sure that he had sensed something. He could no longer suppress the emotions that gushed out from the depths of his heart and woke up. Looking at the scroll he had written on the wall and the simple patterns on the beams and pillars, his eyes were filled with excitement and a very complicated emotion. He felt that although the doors and windows were tightly shut, he seemed to be able to see the grey wall and the row of green trees on Lin 47th Street. He knew that the world in front of him seemed to be no different from the previous world, but from today on, the world to Ning Ke would be different. Stretching out his slightly trembling fingers, Ning Ke aimed at the pea-sized candle flame on the table. He slowly inhaled and urged his psyche to enter the ocean of qi and mountain of snow. After a long time, he slowly released it. The candle flame on the table swayed uneasily. He did not know whether it was because of the wind, his fingers, or his chaotic mind. Is this, the qi of heaven and earth? Looking at his fingertips, he did not see anything, but he could feel that there was a very thin layer of existence there. He muttered to himself and then added in a low voice, "This is the qi of heaven and earth." His young and tender face was full of determination and affirmation, without any wavering or self-doubt. Ning Ke did not have the time to grab an unlined shirt to put on his body. He did not put on his shoes because he did not wear shoes at all. He suddenly jumped off the bed and almost fell down because of his weak legs. He forced himself to run out of the room and knocked over the bucket beside the bed. His waist was hit by the corner of the table. However, the lad who was about to faint from the great happiness did not feel any pain at all. Pushing open the door, he rushed into the small courtyard and stood in front of Sang Sang who was chopping firewood. He looked at the little handmaiden who was bent over and opened his mouth to say something, but found that his voice was a little hoarse and he was almost unable to speak. Sang Sang looked at him in confusion and found that his expression was extremely strange, as if he was crying and laughing at the same time. "Young master, are you all right?" She stood up and raised her arms habitually, wondering if Ning Ke had a fever and was a little confused. But she found that she could touch his head with one foot and could not help but laugh happily. Ning Ke reached out his right hand and grabbed her thin arm. He pulled her into his arms and held her in his naked chest, just like many years ago. He murmured, "It's good that you are alive, and I am, also very good now." He had not cried for many years since he escaped from Chang and with a hatchet. He still did not shed tears today. But he did not know why he felt that his eyes were a little wet and his nose was a little sour. Sang Sang raised her head with difficulty and was shocked to see the faint wetness in Ning Ke's eyes. Then she guessed something and her little face was full of shock. 2 lines of tears flowed out from her willowy eyes. Being speechless and choking was definitely not enough to release the emotions of the master and handmaiden at this moment. Sang Sang opened her thin arms and hugged Ning Ke's waist tightly. She cried bitterly, "Oh! Young master, this is a happy event. You have to eat more duck tonight." After the hug, they separated from each other. Ning Ke looked down at the little handmaiden's dark face with tears. His lips moved slightly as if he wanted to say something, but he did not say anything in the end. Sang Sang immediately understood what he meant. She lowered her head in shame and raised her sleeves to wipe her tears. She whispered while sobbing, I will order takeout from Building of Pines and Cranes. It will cost 6 taels of silver. That's more like it." Ning Ke lovingly rubbed her head. Sang Sang opened the box and took out the silver. She hurried to the shop and suddenly thought of something. She slowly stopped in front of the door and looked back at him. She bit her lips and said very seriously, "Young master, next time you go out and do these dangerous things, you must remember to take me with you. It's not good to wait for you in the shop." Ning Ke quietly looked at her and then nodded hard. He said, "Don't worry. This kind of thing will never happen again. At least within this year, I won't do anything again. You don't have to worry." The door of the old brush pen shop was already closed. The small wooden sign hanging on the shop originally said that the owner was busy, but Sang Sang changed it to, "The owner is happy," in the shortest time possible. Since it was a happy event, they naturally had to drink to liven things up. The master and handmaiden luxuriously ate 6 taels of silver worth of noodles from building of pines and cranes and drank 2 big pots of wine. Sang Sang, who had never been drunk before, was unexpectedly drunk today, either because she was too happy or because she felt sorry for spending so much money on a meal. Ning Kei looked at the little handmaiden who was drunk on the table and scratched his head in surprise. He thought to himself, how could you get drunk before me? He carried Sang Sang back to the room and covered her with a single layer of quilt. Then he sat by the bed and took a round cattail leaf fan to fan her and drive away those annoying mosquitoes. It was Sang Sang who had been serving him all these years and he rarely did these things. But after all, he had done it so many times in his childhood that he was very skilled. The great happiness and excitement gradually calmed down as the round cattail leaf fan swayed. He began to silently think about what had happened to him, and his eyes subconsciously fell on the big black umbrella beside Sang Sang's little face. This is the most wonderful plot that I have ever written. Writing a story is really hard, but I can earn a lot of money, which makes me very happy. But nothing can replace the great happiness I felt when I wrote this plot. This is probably the true meaning of this plot. Put your palms together and feel sour again. But it can't be helped. Ning Kei's nose is sour, and so am I. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 119. Ning Kei had vaguely remembered some of the wonderful things that happened yesterday morning, including the illusory but not dreamlike encounter when he was in a coma on the Long Street. The strength of a cultivator was undoubtedly revealed in the lakeside house. Even if he had brought 3 knives, he could not defeat the opponent. As for the encounter on the Long Street, it was even more dangerous. If it were not for Haotian's luck, he would not have survived, let alone have such a great lucky chance. He firmly believed that Haotian had his own purpose in letting him come to this world, so he believed that he would not die for no reason. This belief supported him through the most difficult period of his childhood and accompanied him through life and death situations. In his view, the big black umbrella beside Sang Sang's pillow was a gift from Haotian. The big black umbrella looked very ordinary, and nothing special could be seen except that it was very big. However, in the dangerous battle yesterday morning, if it had not blocked the invincible flying sword and Yan Suqing's sword fingers at the most critical moment, Ning Kei would have died long ago. The process of picking up the big black umbrella was very ordinary, just like how he picked up Sang Sang. Many years ago, Ning Kei walked on the official road with a little baby girl in his arms. It seemed that it was going to rain, and he happened to see an abandoned black umbrella by the roadside, so he picked it up. When the little boy's little hand held the thick handle of the big black umbrella, nothing strange happened in this world. The dark clouds did not pour down torrential rain, the distant Min Mountain did not shake, and there was not much black smoke rising into the sky. A certain golden-armored deity broke through the clouds and said a lot of nonsense. He did not know how to be thrifty at a young age, so he was ready to throw the black umbrella away after the rainy season because he thought it was too dirty and could not be washed in the stream. Besides, it was too heavy. It was really a bit troublesome to carry the black umbrella with the baby girl and compete with the barbarian refugees who migrated south because of the drought on the grassland for food distributed by the government. However, it was very strange that Sang Sang, who was still a thin baby girl, began to cry when she found that the umbrella was not in her arms, probably because she had slept with the big black umbrella for too long. Ning Kei could not coax her no matter how hard he tried. Even the sugar water he stole did not work. He had no choice but to pick up the big black umbrella again. Many encounters in the following years proved that Sang Sang's crying and Ning Kei's decision were extremely wise. In the process of hunting with the old hunter and later alone, the seemingly ordinary big black umbrella gradually revealed more and more strange things. The greasy surface of the big black umbrella was made of some unknown material, but it was not afraid of fire, knives, and swords at all. With this strange characteristic, the big black umbrella had saved Ning Kai and Sang Sang several times. It was because of the umbrella that the young master and handmaiden could survive in the dangerous world of the high mountains and steep ridges. Ning Kai and Sang Sang had been with the big black umbrella for many years and had long regarded it as a very important partner in their lives. That was why Sang Sang had said that day at the gate of Chang'an City, "As long as the umbrella lives, I live. If the umbrella dies, I die." In addition to being impervious to fire and knives, the big black umbrella had many other strange things. Ning Kai was very convinced of this, but he was not able to find it for the time being. He needed to explore it slowly. The battle in the morning yesterday was like the most dangerous battles in the past decade. At the last moment of life and death, he almost instinctively gave his life to the big black umbrella behind him. It turned out that the big black umbrella did not let him down. At the same time, he also discovered another secret of the big black umbrella. It could make the traceless flying sword lose all its power, and it could make a sword master unable to break through it even with his lifetime cultivation. This had gone beyond the original physical defense characteristics of the big black umbrella and entered a more wonderful state. Ning Kai even faintly felt that the big black umbrella was very likely to restrain the ability of cultivators. It could be said that the umbrella's cloth was made of some rare materials since it was impervious to swords and spears and impervious to water and fire. However, if his inference was correct, what reason could he use to explain all this? The big black umbrella lay quietly beside Sang Sang's dark face. It could neither speak nor move, just like a lifeless object. However, at this time, in Ning Kai's eyes, the tightly bound oily umbrella began to gradually release a mysterious aura. The aura was a little cold, but it disappeared in an instant when Ning Kai took a closer look. In the face of mysterious things, human beings would instinctively feel fear. However, this was, after all, a cultivation world full of the chi of heaven and earth with many magical legends. Ning Kai himself was the person involved in the most mysterious event. In addition, he had been accompanied by the big black umbrella since childhood. He used it as a shelter, a pillow, and a shield to escape. It had long become an indispensable part of his and Sang Sang's lives, so how could he have any fear? "What, on earth are you?" Ning Kai, who had not yet recovered from his serious injury and encountered a surprise and happiness that made him dizzy, got up early and fell asleep while looking at the big black umbrella. He subconsciously held Sang Sang in his arms through the thin sheet. With a light clap, the cattail leaf fan fell to the ground. A dim sun hung above the silent wilderness. The environment was dark as if night was coming. The surrounding temperature was very low, and the purest and most extreme darkness was spreading from afar. It looked like it was about to occupy the entire world. The silence of the wilderness did not mean that there were no people here. There were many people of all kinds. These people did not look up at the sky, but looked at Ning Quebec. Their eyes were full of expectations, disdain, doubt, and very complicated emotions. Ning Kai knew that he had begun to dream again. It was not the dream of the sea when he was meditating. It was a continuation of the terrible dream on the journey. Although he knew that he was in a dream, he still felt cold all over, as if the eyes of these people in the wilderness, no matter what kind of emotion they contained, hid some subtle hostility. The darkness gradually invaded the sky above the wilderness, and the pure night covered half of the sky. At this moment, a roar of thunder came from the wilderness, and instantly spread to the whole world. Many people in the wilderness were knocked down to the ground by the roar of thunder, moaning in pain. The expressions on the faces of those who could still stand suddenly disappeared. Like lifeless statues, they looked up at the sky again, to the place where the thunder came from. The holy light instantly lit up the whole night sky. High up in the sky, in the center of the holy radiance, there was a gigantic golden gate that slowly opened, and a gigantic golden dragon could be vaguely seen poking its head out. The thunder was the sound of the door opening. This chapter can only contain 2,000 words. I really can't stand it anymore. I've tried my best. Put your palms together. In addition, please vote for me to encourage me. Both the recommendation and the monthly vote are good. Please. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 120. It was still night when he woke up from the dream. Ning-Ke wiped the sweat off his forehead and sat on the bed. He looked at Sang-Sang, who was sleeping soundly beside him, and subconsciously reached out his fingers to smooth her frowning eyebrows. Then he fell into deep thought. It was meaningless to think about this strange and frightening dream. After a moment of silence, he threw the content of the dream to the back of his mind and did not even want to recall it. He got out of bed and poured himself a cup of cold tea. Listening to the loud discussion of the neighbors in the narrow alley behind the house, he realized that it was still early and everyone was still enjoying the cool air. What the eyes see and what the heart feels is the projection of the primordial energy of all things in the world on his soul. And the purer and purer the will that this cultivator obtains through meditation, the more concentrated and powerful the primordial energy he feels will be. He was too excited during the day and completely calmed down now. Thinking of what Liu Qingchen said on the journey, he realized that he had forgotten the most important question: how much qi of heaven and earth did he feel when he entered the initial awareness state? Was it a puddle of rain, a stream, a shallow pond, or a big river, or a sea? It was not the first time that he entered the initial awareness state. He did not know whether the world of qi of heaven and earth he felt was a real projection. After thinking for a moment, Ning-Ke slowly closed his eyes and calmly put his hands on his knees. He re-entered the state of meditation and transmitted his thoughts to the ocean of qi and mountain of snow, and then spread them out of his body. After a while, the cautious meditation in the spiritual world transitioned to the perception in the real world. He opened his eyes and stretched out his right hand in the air, as if he wanted to catch the faint candlelight. At this time, he once again confirmed that he could clearly feel the aura in the eaves, walls, and air, and shockingly confirmed that what he felt was, "I think it's a sea, a peaceful sea." Liu Qingchen once said, the most powerful cultivator in the world today, Liu Bai, the sage of sword from South Jin Kingdom, who was regarded as the most likely to break through the 5 states, sensed a surging yellow river at the beginning of his awakening. At that time, Ning-Ke once said, if one could sense a sea, would he be a cultivation genius more powerful than the sage of sword from South Jin Kingdom? For more than 10 years, he ate, gambled, read, wrote, slept, rode, killed, and set fires. He kept meditating. The amount of psyche power in the young man's spiritual world was huge and extremely pure. As 10 of the 17 acupoints in the ocean of qi and mountain of snow were opened, the accumulated psyche power finally found a channel and was played into a sonorous and powerful music. The breath of heaven and earth sensed this tune. Although there weren't many holes on the flute, and the song seemed a little sluggish, it could feel the power contained in every note of the song. However, this power was so concentrated that the breath of heaven and earth faintly rejected it. If the breath of heaven and earth that Ning-Ke sensed was like a sea, then the psyche power that he used to sense the breath of heaven and earth was like a well-tempered iron needle. His psyche power was extremely small, but extremely hard and sharp. The sharp iron needle gently fell into the sea. It didn't make any waves, nor did it make any sound. It easily and silently passed through the boundless deep water, and then slowly and silently fell into the dark abyss. Ning-Ke didn't know these specific problems, nor did he want to think about any negative things. He was like a boy who had cried for his mother's thigh for half a year and finally got a new toy that he wanted for a long time. He spent the whole night meditating and then releasing his psyche, feeling the new and wonderful aura. His palm kept shaking in the air, trying to catch the dim candlelight in the shack and influence the pea-sized candle on the table. Although he failed, it didn't affect his interest at all. He was still in high spirits. Strangely, when he left the old brush pen shop the next morning, he didn't look haggard because he didn't sleep all night. Instead, he looked very energetic and healthy. Maybe it was because he was in high spirits when he encountered a happy event. Ning Kei came to the academy by horse carriage. Looking at the green meadow, the lush green trees, the flowing clouds on the mountain, the beautiful morning light in the east, and the black and white buildings and eaves covered by the clouds, Ning Kei always felt that the world in his eyes was coated with a beautiful halo. The originally very beautiful mountain of the academy looked even more charming, and he was so happy that he wanted to laugh out loud. Because he was in a good mood, he changed his usual gentle and alienated temperament and took the initiative to greet his classmate who just got off the horse carriage and was holding a pancake in one hand and a book in the other. However, the atmosphere in the academy today was a little strange. To be more precise, the atmosphere surrounding Ning Kei was a little strange. His classmates did not seem to be in the mood to exchange pleasantries with him. In the distance, some students even gathered in a group and pointed at him with disdain. Ning Kei walked into classroom 3 in bewilderment. Then, he was surprised to find that the classmates he was more familiar with in the study room were behaving strangely as well. They were all looking at him strangely. He suppressed the doubts in his heart and nodded to Situelan who was sitting in the front row, and then walked to his seat. Situelan lowered her head to look at the review paper for the mathematics class yesterday and didn't seem to see his movement. However, when he walked past her, she looked back and sighed at Ning Kei's back. "I've taken 2 days off, but why do I feel that everyone is looking at me differently?" Ning Kei sat down and looked at Chu Yuxian beside him. He asked with a smile, "Does everyone know that I jumped off the cliff and have an adventure, so they are jealous and hate me?" This was naturally a naughty joke, but the cheerful Chu Yuxian didn't have a smile on his face. He stared at Ning Kei's face and said seriously, "You really don't know what happened?" "I don't know." Ning Kei spread out his hands and said innocently, "The Empire is attacking the Northern Yen again. Today is the etiquette class, and the instructor is a yen with a bad temper. That is indeed worth worrying about. Isn't it a little inappropriate to make a joke at this time?" Chu Yuxian looked at him and sighed. He said, "The whole academy, from instructors to students, is staring at the semester exam the day before yesterday. They want to see who will win the bet between you and Xie Qingyun. Who can think that the final result is that he got A+ in 5 subjects, while you didn't take the exam? This is why you think everyone is so strange." Ning Kei was slightly stunned. After being reminded, he remembered what happened that morning after Xie Qingyun and other grade A dormitory students broke into grade C dormitory, and remembered that the semester exam in the bet had ended the day before yesterday. What was he doing at that time? At that time, he was leaning against the wall on the 2nd floor of the old library, with an invisible spear in his chest and unconscious. He was accompanied by a bowl of water and 2 cold steamed buns, waiting for death. The semester exam was the day before yesterday. I really forgot. But I remember that I asked a female professor to ask for leave for me. Ning Kei explained with a smile. In his opinion, it was a very childish and funny thing to use the results of the semester exam as a yardstick for the gambling fight with Xie Qingyun. At that time, he only agreed to it because of the anger of Situelan and grade C dormitory students. Now that he missed the semester exam and the bet because of other things, it was indeed a pity to miss the opportunity to attack the pretentious arrogance of Xie Qingyun. But in any case, he would not lament, beat his chest and stamp his feet, cry on the table, and pretend to be a senior in grade 3 who forgot to get the admission ticket. In the quiet and serious morning of the semester exam in the academy, he killed a strong cultivator in the lakeside house and spent a very mysterious time on the Vermilion Bird Avenue. He went back and forth between life and death several times. He encountered the biggest crisis and the biggest luck in his 16 years of life. Compared with these things, these personal disputes were nothing. The problem is that you asked for leave. Chu Yuxian looked at him expressionlessly and said, as long as you take part in the semester exam, even if the final result is bad and you are far from being Xie Qingyan's opponent, no one will have any opinions on you. There is no reason to win an exam. You were asked to fight that day just to show your courage. But no one thought that you would be so afraid that you even dare not to take the exam. This is too troublesome. Ning Ke listened to these words and could not help but be slightly startled. After a moment, he said with a smile, "What do you mean? Do I have to go straight to the examination room with my sick body, with a pale face and struggling to move the pen to take the exam? Do I have courage when I answer every question and only answer half of the questions, the snow-white paper is all dyed red, and then I die because of blood loss?" His words were interesting, but there was also an extremely sharp and angry tone to them. "Are you really sick?" Chu Yuxian felt the anger hidden in his tone and said after being startled, "But looking at your ruddy face now, who will believe you?" Then he sighed and said, "Yesterday the results of the semester exam were announced. Linchuan Wangying got an A+ in one subject, and the other 5 A+ were all obtained by Xie Qingyan. I heard that he was stimulated by you these months and studied very hard. Now there is a rumor in the academy that you know you are not Xie Qingyan's opponent, but you are not willing to lose to him, so you came up with the idea of asking for sick leave to stop the fight." Ning Ke frowned and said, "It is shameful to retreat without a fight, not to mention to avoid a fight. Although I feel that this semester exam gamble is extremely boring, I won't be afraid since I've agreed to it. If it's really as you said, that I'm not sick, but I'm pretending to be sick to avoid the semester exam, isn't that what a coward would do?" Chu Yuxian now really believed that he was really sick the day before yesterday. He looked at him sympathetically and patted his shoulder to comfort him, "I believe you, but the problem is that others, especially those in grade A dormitory, will not believe you. In the eyes of them and even most people in the academy, now you are a coward." Ning Ke was speechless and could not help shaking his head with a wry smile. There was some anger and unwillingness in his heart, but when he thought of those wonderful feelings last night, he decided not to think about these things anymore. Now he was also a genius student who could cultivate, why should he stoop down to the level of these little kids? Stare was very simple when it was used as a noun, but it was an action that required both sides to interact when it was used as a verb. He did not want to stare at those classmates who thought he was a coward who avoided the fight, but he could not stop some guys who automatically won because of his withdrawal from the competition to run in front of him and insist on stare at him with verbs. And this was the origin of most conflicts in all youth idol dramas. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 121. The bell rang for the third time. Ning Ke tidied up the stationery and prepared to go to the old library to read as usual. Today he was anxious to leave a message for Chen Pipi, so he walked out of the study room in a hurry. As soon as the bell rang, we came here. I thought this speed was extremely fast, but I didn't expect that we almost passed by you. I don't understand why you are so anxious. Are you anxious to go to the old library to pretend to be diligent, or are you anxious to leave the academy and pretend that you don't know about the semester exam and the gambling game that day? A group of people came in through the door, headed by Xie Qingyun and Zhong Dajuan from the South Jin Kingdom. After entering the door, Xie Qingyun greeted the students of classroom 3 with hands folded in front. He could not completely suppress the proud smile on his young face, but he still showed his gentle demeanor. Zhong Dajuan, who was beside him, stood in front of Ning Ke and tapped his palm with the folding fan in his hand. His expression seemed to be a smile, and his tone was extremely sarcastic. At least say a few words before you leave. Situilan stood up and wanted to say something. But thinking that Ning Ke did not take part in the semester exam, the A dormitory students naturally won the gambling game. She suddenly did not know what to say and had to sullenly sit down again. Jean Wuxia knew how competitive she was, and could not help but shake her head. Then she stood up and walked to Xie Qingyun, gently and softly congratulating him, with a gentle smile on her face like a gentle breeze. "Want me to say a few words?" Ning Ke looked at the A dormitory students at the door and felt the complicated emotions cast by his classmates behind him. After a little thought, he looked at Zhong Dajuan and said with a smile, "Then I will say a few words briefly." Then he added, "But what does this matter have to do with you? Please excuse me." Zhong Dajuan's face darkened, but he did not say anything more. He waved his fan and retreated to the side. Ning Ke and Xie Qingyun greeted each other with hands folded in front. As for what kind of complaints and disdain in their hearts, it was something that outsiders did not know. The study room suddenly became quiet, waiting to hear what he would say. After a short pause, Ning Ke looked at Xie Qingyun's pale cheeks and said with a smile, "There is no excuse. Since I did not take part in the semester exam, I naturally lost the gambling game. I remember the bet is to have a meal, so let's have a meal. You can choose the place and how many people you want to invite." Xie Qingyun was slightly stunned and did not expect that Ning Ke would admit defeat so openly. He could not say those words that he discussed with Zhong Dajuan in the Zhong mansion yesterday. Seeing that Xie Qingyun didn't know how to deal with it, Zhong Dajuan couldn't help but be annoyed that his friend was too gentle, so he sneered and interjected, "In order to avoid losing face in the semester exam, you even came up with such a despicable trick as pretending to be sick to avoid the exam. In the future, if we talk about it, you can shamelessly say that it's not that you're not a match for third young Master Xie, but that you're not in good health. When people like you invite us to dinner, we really worry that there's something strange at the table, so we definitely don't dare to go." Ning Ke slightly raised his eyebrows and looked at the Tang talent from Yang Valley. He said very seriously, "I remember that the letter of challenge was taken from Xie Qingyun. So whether the semester exam is good or bad, or whether I win or lose the gambling game, it is between me and him. What does it have to do with you? If you want to have a meal, it depends on whether I can save a chair for you or not." Zhong Dajuan was not annoyed. He gently waved his fan and glanced at Xie Qingyun. Xie Qingyun did not want to be too aggressive in front of Jean Wuxia, but he could not help but feel disgusted when he saw that Ning Ke was still so eloquent and did not look ashamed. He frowned and said, "There is no need to have a meal. I just hope you can realize that your behavior really disgraces the academy's reputation. I have to pay tuition fees to study in the academy. I pay money and learn things at the same time. So I don't think I need to carry something like 1,000 years of fame. Those things have nothing to do with me." Ning Ke raised his eyebrows more steeply and said, "As for you saying that I pretended to be sick to avoid the exam, you'd better not talk about this boring inference in the future. Since we are not familiar with each other, I absolutely don't mind suing you for slander." The atmosphere in the study room gradually became tense because Ning Ke was too calm and did not have any intention of giving in. Similar to Xie Qingyun's feeling, most students looked at Ning Ke with more contempt. Chu Yuxian coughed twice and came forward to smooth things over. He said with a smile, "Knowing that you are not the opponent, but avoiding the battle to protect yourself is also a common means in the business world. You don't have to be so serious." Ning Ke glared at him and said, "Do you want to help me or pour a few buckets of dirty water on me? If you can't win the exam, just admit defeat. Why do you use such a rogue trick?" Someone in the study room suddenly said. Ning Ke did not turn his head to look at the source of the voice, but he knew that it was a student in the same room. After a moment of silence, he looked at the classmates around him who showed contempt, puzzlement and many complicated expressions, smiled uninterestedly, and then began to speak. "I don't care whether you believe what I say or not, and I don't care whether you will secretly call me a coward or not. Because our levels are not the same. You can say that I am unreasonable, because I don't have the spirit to reason with you. As Her Highness said outside the old library that day, you are just some flowers in the greenhouse. Although you look beautiful, you have to hide from the outdoor storm. You have nothing to do all day long, so you have to show off everywhere and rack your brains to make some slanting wind and drizzle to show your strength and ability. But it's none of my business. If I'm interested in playing with you, then I'll play. If not, then I won't play. Don't think about questioning me with things like integrity and bearing. You care about things like integrity, bearing and morality, but I don't. When you were still lying in your mother's arms and being threatened by her with grassland horse gang because you refused to drink milk, I was already playing with the horse gang's head on the grassland. I just said, I don't care whether you will laugh at me behind my back, I am a coward and a rascal, but you must remember, from now on, don't let me hear you laugh at me, because I don't like it. Don't ignore my threat, if you don't want to have your head turned into a ball like those horse gangs. After saying this, he did not look at the people in the study room again. He waved his hand to signal the grade A dormitory students in front of him to make way. He raised his head and puffed out his chest, walked out of the door, and walked along the rain-sheltered corridor to the back of the academy. He was originally in a good mood, but because of these dirty things that popped out of nowhere, his mood was really bad. Especially when he found that even those classmates who were familiar with him did not mean to defend him, but believed what Zhong Dujuan said, he was even more annoyed. Since he was annoyed, he did not bother to pretend to be a gentle, cute, and harmless primary school student, and directly expressed his feelings. Chu Yuxian looked at the back of the figure in the rain-sheltered corridor and hurriedly caught up with him. He shook his head and sighed, "This is great, you have offended all of my classmates, I have to keep a distance from you in the future." "Then why do you still want to catch up at this time?" Ning Kei said with a smile. "You said that they are little brats, but the girls in dozens of brothels in Chang'an can prove that I am not a little brat, so I don't think that your words hurt me." Chu Yuxian said with a smile, "Moreover, if I have a good relationship with you, I might be able to get close to the top girl in the House of Red Sleeves in the future. You don't have to look at me like this, don't worry, I will only look at Dewdrop from afar, I just want you to introduce Lu Shui to me." Ning Kei looked at him sideways and said with a smile, "Aren't you afraid of offending a large group of classmates? Everyone in the academy knows that we have a good relationship, if you fall out with them and I leave you behind, I will be judged as heartless by those pedants. You know that I don't like to study, and I can't get used to seeing those pedants." Chu Yuxian laughed at himself, stopped and said, "So I have to comfort you in front of them, but as you said, I can't go against the academy, so I have to go back now." For a border town soldier who had lived a bloody life since he was young and could be described as killing people like flax on the grassland, he was not used to the quiet and peaceful life in the academy, not to mention those classmates who grew up in a peaceful world. The evaluation above was Ning Kei's true feelings, but to the students in the study room, this evaluation was undoubtedly the most vicious attack, and they could not help but be stunned on the spot. To the third young Master Xie of South Jin Kingdom, the bet with Ning Kei on the semester exam was a very important matter. That was because he had been defeated by this seemingly ordinary lad during the academy entrance examination and had suffered a crushing defeat at the old library. He had even been coldly reprimanded by the fourth princess of Tang. He had hoped that this bet could help him regain his confidence. It was a rare good result to get an A+ in 5 courses. Xie Qingyun's joy inevitably gave birth to some pride. Today, he brought his companions to classroom 3, not necessarily to humiliate Ning Kei, but also to show off his brocade clothes. For Zhong Dujuan, after entering the academy, all the limelight had been taken by Xie Qingyun and Ning Kei, as well as Linchuan Wangying, who was only 14 years old. As a talent carefully cultivated by the Yangguan family, how could he be reconciled? Xie Qingyun and Wang Ying had a great reputation before entering the academy, and one of them was his close friend, while the other was too young. But who was Ning Kei? How could he be above him? Therefore, for this semester exam bet, he was even more attentive than Xie Qingyun. Today, Coming to classroom 3 was undoubtedly to humiliate Ning Ke, and at the same time, to expose his scoundrel and insidious face to the academy students. However, whether it was Xie Qingyun or Zhong Dajuan, or those grade dormitory students who followed them to classroom 3 to watch the fun and cheer, they did not expect that after such a despicable and cowardly act, Ning Ke would not feel ashamed at all, and instead, he reprimanded them for their humiliation. They had originally come to humiliate him, but in the end, Ning Ke used a trick called unreasonable to block all of them, and instead, they were humiliated by him. Therefore, those students who had some doubts that Ning Ke might really be sick on the day of the semester exam were not willing to think in that direction again. Not only them, but all the young students, including the students of classroom 3, were enraged by Ning Ke's seemingly forceful reprimand, but in fact, unreasonable. Even the most ordinary student from a commoner's family was loved in the school of their hometown. How could they endure the ridicule of a group? Forget it, don't lower yourself to that guy's level. A student suppressed his unwillingness and reminded the crowd, after all, he is an old friend of the princess. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to cast a recommendation vote or a monthly vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 122. It's not appropriate to use the word old friend. Zhong Dajuan stared at the back of the figure in the rainproof corridor and said angrily, who knows how Her Highness met him and was deceived by him. In front of the study room, the burly Chu Zhongtian scratched his head and said, I mentioned to my elders that Her Highness knew Ning Ke after I returned home. My fifth uncle later wrote back that he had asked Hua Shanyue, the senior military officer of Gushan Commandery. He said that Ning Ke was a soldier of the city of Wei. His Highness had accompanied His Highness on the way back to the capital. His Highness remembered this, so he occasionally took care of him in Chang'an. Chu Zhongtian was the best among the 37 grandsons of great General Chu Xiongtu of the Tang Empire's 16 guards. He was doted on in the residence, and the elders would not avoid him when discussing the court affairs. Therefore, his words were always credible. It seems that it was just a coincidence that day in front of the old library. As for helping Her Highness on her way back to the capital, Zhong Dajuan sneered lightly and said, what can he do as a little soldier? By the way, helping to set up tents, leading horses and collecting dung can also be counted as helping. Her Highness is virtuous and kind, so it's not strange that she occasionally takes care of him. But I really didn't expect that this villain dared to use Her Highness's prestige to raise his status. He is really despicable. Hearing this, Situé Lan, who had been sitting silently beside the table, suddenly stood up and looked at Zhong Dajuan. She said, when did Ning Ke use Her Highness's prestige to raise his status? I know better than you what Ning Ke did on her way back from the city of Wei. If it was just to collect dung, do you think Her Highness would come to see him in person that day? She raised her eyebrows and said in a low voice, you said Ning Ke is a villain and despicable. Then I don't know what you mean by talking about others behind their backs. If you really think he is so unbearable, you can point it out to him. But as he said before he left, you dare not because you are still afraid of him. Zhong Dajun's face darkened. He did not expect that this noble lady of Chang'an would still speak for Ning Ke when he had offended most of his classmates. He suppressed his anger and explained, I'm not afraid of him. But we are all refined people. Do we have to roll up our sleeves and fight with that young barbarian? Situé Lan did not want to talk with this so-called gifted scholar. She looked back at her companion who was whispering to Xie Qingyun, frowned slightly, and asked angrily, Wuxia, are you coming back? Jean Wuxia secretly glanced at Xie Qingyun's face, and then looked at Situé Lan with a smile, saying, you go back first, I'll go to the old library to read for a while. Situé Lan knew that the so-called reading in the old library was just an excuse, so she didn't bother to pay attention to it. She packed up her things and walked to Xie Qingyun. Looking at the famous talent of the South Jin Kingdom, she said, Wuxia is the favorite granddaughter of the libationer of the Tang Empire. Although you are famous in the South Jin Kingdom, please go to the second floor first. Xie Qingyun instantly understood what she meant. He smiled slightly and said confidently, I'll try my best. Zhong de Jun was dissatisfied with Situelan's previous words for Ning Quebec. He said sarcastically, if Mr. Xie can't enter the second floor, I think no student of the academy can enter this year. Or do you think Ning Ke can enter? Situelan frowned and glanced at him, and then turned away angrily. In front of all the classmates in the dormitory, she couldn't promise that Ning Ke could enter the second floor. Not to mention that she did not believe it, she believed that Ning Ke dared not have such an extravagant hope. In the kitchen, Ning Ke ate 3 pieces of fried steamed buns with a bowl of golden millet porridge. He passed through the wetland at the fastest speed, walked into the quiet old library, and entered the second floor. This second floor was different from the previous second floor. But for him, this floor full of books and the faint fragrance of old ink was also of great significance. It was unknown whether it was the faint scent of books that calmed one's mind easily, or the tightly closed west window blocked the blazing sunlight, making the building cool and pleasant. Walking into the second floor, Ning Ke's previous grievances in the study room, like the summer sweat on his body, were instantly swept away. Walking to the east window, Ning Ke looked at the slender, gentle and tranquil female professor, and bowed respectfully as usual. After straightening up, he looked at the beautiful side face of the female professor, whose age could not be guessed. Thinking of the day before yesterday, when he was seriously injured and about to die, he had a strong confusion in his heart. He wanted to open his mouth to ask her a few questions, but in the end, he did not dare to act rashly. The female professor seemed to have forgotten what she saw the day before yesterday, and that the lad beside her had been leaning against the wall in the building, waiting for death. She gently nodded her chin as usual, without looking at Ning Ke or saying anything. She quietly read the hairpin-style small regular script on the paper. If one did not look carefully, it would be difficult to notice the slight movement of her chin. Ning Ke laughed at himself, scratched his head, and stopped thinking about those things. He walked back to the bookshelf, squatted down, took out the book Wu Zhanyang's Theory on Haran Sword, sat on the floor by the west window, and read it attentively with the dim light coming through the window paper. In the past, the acupoints in the ocean of Qi and mountain of snow were blocked, so he could not remember the cultivation scripts in the building. In the beginning, he even fainted when he saw the numbers. Later, when he learned to use the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong to break the characters, he could slightly understand the profound meaning of the handwriting in the book. However, those strokes still made him extremely distressed. For example, the strokes in the handwriting of the Haran sword book were like sharp sword radiance, piercing directly into his liver and intestines, making him extremely painful. Now, although he still could not clearly know how many acupoints in his ocean of Qi and mountain of snow had been opened, he could feel the breath of heaven and earth in the world, which was like a calm ocean, which was enough to prove that the 4 words, blocked without pain, had been mercifully taken away from him by Haotian. Therefore, he very much wanted to know what would be different when he read these books now. It was indeed different. The meaning hidden in the ink on the book entered his mind through his eyes and then gradually spread into his body. When it turned into sword rays that began to circulate around his body, he no longer felt the unbearable pain in his chest. Instead, it turned into a somewhat gloomy feeling. Blocked, very blocked, very blocked. This feeling was very bad, and it easily reminded him of Ma Yinglong's medicine. Therefore, after reading attentively for more than an hour, he shook his head and put down the book. He walked to the west window and began to leave a message for Chin Pippi. First, I've opened it. You can congratulate me. Second, why do these books still seem to be useless? Third, do you have any simple and feasible methods to teach me? Finally, thank you. With a very slight regret, Ning Ke went downstairs in the twilight and took a horse carriage back to Lin 47th Street in Chang'an City. Then, he began to look forward to tomorrow's academy life, because he wanted to know what Chen Pipi's message would be. He did not know that his regret was actually an emotion that deserved a beating. If the West Hill Haotian Divine Palace or some other Vedanta of the Buddhism sect knew that a young man who had just entered the initial awareness state hoped to officially start cultivating within a day, they would definitely expel this young man for being greedy or greedy. If the instructors of the academy knew that one of their students had really become a peerless cultivation genius after opening 10 of the 17 acupoints in the ocean of Qi and mountain of snow and couldn't wait to learn the academy's unique skill, Haran sword, they would definitely praise him for being so narcissistic, and then make him stretch out his hand and slap his palm 100 times. The vermilion bird portrait carved by the sage of the previous generation on Chang'an Avenue, the mysterious big black umbrella behind him, and the heavenly power pill from a certain place in the West Hill were all the most precious and magical things in the world. But if it was only one of them, it was still not enough to make such a change in his body. There had always been a saying in the cultivation world that cultivation was just a chosen human being who was lucky to pick up the gift given by Haotian. If an ordinary person who was born unable to cultivate could cultivate, that was to go against the heaven and change his fate. The ability to go against the heaven and change his fate could only be a miracle. According to the classics or oral tradition, only the West Hill Divine Palace and the Haotian Divine Palace had this ability, and it required those great divine priests with a high state to pay a great price. Therefore, the ordinary cultivator beside Min Mountain, the talisman master in charge of the assessment of the military ministry, the old man Liu Qingchen on the journey, and Chen Pipi who left the letter could simply conclude that Ning Ke could not cultivate without any hesitation. However, when the three most magical things in the world, the vermilion bird, the black umbrella, and the heavenly power pill, had sex with Ning Ke at the same time, the world's slowly rotating fate slightly trembled. This sentence can be ignored. In that dark morning, the cultivator Yan Suqing first broke the bone and flesh defense on his chest with his lifetime cultivation, and then the top wing of the vermilion bird turned into an invisible spear and pierced through his ocean of Qi and mountain of snow through this wound. Then the vermilion bird burned everything it touched with invisible fire. At this time, Ning Ke should have died. The big black umbrella played a key role at this time, protecting his last vitality like the shade of a willow that covered the sun, and reshaping the mountain of snow in his body with the inexhaustible power of the night sky. But this was not enough, because the reshaped micro-world in his body was so fragile and unstable that it could collapse at any time. At this time, Chen Pipi offered a heavenly power pill like a virgin offering her chastity. Heaven rewarded the diligent. Maybe it was because he had been too hard and tired in the past 10 years, so Haotian began to make it up to him. Ning Ke did not know that he had encountered the most magical luck in the world. Even if he knew, he could not understand the truth. He was still dissatisfied and regretful that his fate was changed against the heaven, and this kind of dissatisfaction and regret really made people angry and speechless. Chen Pipi was speechless and angry. Seeing the word, congratulations, Chen Pipi guessed that the guy had been forced to change his fate against the heaven and really embarked on the road of cultivation. He could not help but open his mouth wide and could not say a word for a long time. He strongly suspected that his eyes were playing tricks on him. He did not know about the magical battle between the vermilion bird and the big black umbrella on the long street with Ning Ke's body as the battlefield. But as a peerless cultivation genius cultivated by both the West Hill and the Academy, he could guess some reasons and consequences. But no matter how he guessed, he could not guess that Ning Ke could have such a miraculous lucky chance. The shock lasted for a long time, and he did not know what to say at all. Deep in his proud and gentle heart, a strong feeling of envy and jealousy grew. And when he saw the message on the paper, he could not suppress his anger. It was hot and dry in the summer. Although there was a cool breeze in the middle of the night, and the cicadas outside the west window gradually weakened. Chen Pipi was sweating all over, either because he was too fat or because he was angry. He untied his clothes and wrote back angrily, "First of all, I don't want to congratulate you, because this is too absurd and incomprehensible. Secondly, it's not that reading is useless, but you, a cultivation idiot, is useless. Thirdly, I admit that I am very jealous of you at this time, so I don't want to guide you. Finally, please thank Haotian and your ancestors of 18 generations. As for me, thank you my ass." Ning Ke had been brainwashed by one sentence when he was very, very young, in fact, when he was very, very young. The general meaning of that sentence was, a person's knowledge is like a circle. The more things you know, the bigger the circle is, and then you will find more and more things you don't know. He used to hate this sentence, and did not understand why his mother and teachers kept educating him with this pessimistic theory. But when he finally stepped into the world of cultivation, he found that this sentence was indeed very true, so true that it made him extremely confused and helpless, because he found that there were more and more things he did not understand. After seeing Chen Pipi's message, he very seriously read the cultivation books on the second floor according to the message, but he still could not find anything after looking at them. In this life, he was used to carrying 3 knives and killing people everywhere on the grassland, which was a relatively straightforward way of thinking, which was not a bad thing. After confirming that he could not move forward for the time being, Ning Ke decided not to think about it, but to do something more important. No one could imagine what was the first thing Ning Ke did after confirming that he could cultivate. He didn't hold a wine pot and write books all day long. He didn't go to the instructors of the academy and yell, "I can do it. I can do it. I can do it." He didn't go to the princess's mansion and tell Li Yu that he was worth investing in. Except for secretly happy in the old brush pen shop with Sang Sang, looking up from time to time like 2 fools, and then laughing inexplicably, he just showed off to Chen Pipi for a while, and then he went to the South City. Tonight, at the entrance of the famous star-picking casino in the South City, a nervous master and servant were whispering. The black-haired lad with a clear face and shallow cheeks looked up at the gold-painted signboard of the star-picking casino, and swallowed a mouthful of saliva, not knowing whether it was due to nervousness or greed, and asked in a slightly hoarse voice, "Sang Sang, do you think we will be chased by the casino if we win too much later?" The slightly dark-skinned little handmaiden was also very nervous. She held a heavy box in her right hand and shrank her body behind the lad. Listening to the noise coming from the dim light, she said in a trembling voice, "Young master, I am more worried about whether your idea will work or not. Can you see the points on the dice by sensing the chi of heaven and earth? Are you sure? If I lose all the money later, don't be so anxious that you'll bet on me." "What nonsense are you talking about? Besides, even if I bet you, the casino may not accept it." Ning Ke nervously rubbed his hands and said, "As for the confidence, didn't I show it to you many times last night? I never fight a battle that I am not sure of. I will definitely win, but the key is how to run after winning. I'm sure we can win." Sang Sang didn't seem to worry about running at all. After hearing that they could win, she gently bit her lips and made up her mind. She took out a small star made of folded paper from her old belt and said softly, "I took 200 taels of silver from under the bed and exchanged them for a banknote. There are still more than 100 taels of silver in the box. Young master, take it and win as much as you can." Well, this chapter has 4,000 taels of silver, including the 2,000 taels of silver from yesterday's chapter. But if there are still 2,000 taels of silver left, I'm not sure I will make up for it. I'm really writing like an idiot. Last night, I counted the days with my leader and found that there were still 5 days left. At that time, I wanted to open the window and jump down. But to be honest, I was able to finish it. Before writing this chapter, my body was weak, and my hands were shaking. I told Zhang Xiaohua that I couldn't do it anymore. Xiaohua asked, "What's wrong?" "Maybe it's because I'm too tired." Later, I smoothly finished writing 4,000 words. Then I realized that it wasn't because I was writing too hard. It was because I ate too little last night and was so hungry. I put my palms together and scolded the leader. Finally, I want a recommendation vote. Finally, thank you. Don't thank my sister, I don't have a sister. Good night, good morning, I'm going to walk the dog, and then I'll sleep. See you at night. This paragraph is more than 4,000 words, so I have no choice but to state it out of boredom to avoid misunderstanding. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.